Long before written records and familiar histories, entire civilizations rose, thrived, and vanished, leaving behind only fragments of stone, sediment, and subtle traces of human ingenuity. Across continents, from windswept plains to hidden river valleys, these lost societies carved their mark on the world in ways that challenge modern understanding of technology, organization, and survival. Their existence predates our earliest chronicles, yet their influence echoes faintly through artifacts, mysterious structures, and landscapes shaped by human hands long ago. Through dense, shadowed forests and along forgotten waterways, you will trace the paths of these ancient people, uncovering submerged settlements, geometric earthworks, and monumental constructions that defy expectation. Excavations reveal delicate tools, charred hearths, and enigmatic alignments with celestial cycles, offering tantalizing glimpses of lives that balanced ingenuity, ritual, and survival. Every discovery opens a doorway into civilizations that once flourished in secrecy, inviting exploration into a past that refuses to fully reveal itself. The world beneath Gobekli Tepe. The plateau rises quietly above the plains of southeastern Anatolia, its surface broken by low mounds of earth that give little hint of what lies beneath. At Gobekli Tepe, massive stone pillars arranged in circular enclosures have reshaped how prehistory is understood, revealing a level of organization that predates agriculture and written language. Yet the structures visible today may not represent the beginning of the story. Beneath these carefully erected monuments, evidence suggests that an even older phase of human activity once existed, a buried layer that points toward a lost civilization whose traces were deliberately sealed and hidden long before history began. Excavations led by Klaus Schmidt revealed that the site dates back to roughly 9,600 BCE, placing it firmly within the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when humans were believed to live as small mobile groups rather than organized societies capable of monumental construction. The discovery of T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing several tons and arranged with precise symmetry, challenged that assumption. Carved into their surfaces are reliefs of animals, including foxes, snakes, and birds, rendered with a level of detail that suggests symbolic meaning rather than simple decoration. These carvings hint at shared beliefs or narratives, the kind of cultural cohesion expected from a structured society rather than scattered groups of hunter-gatherers. What makes the site more difficult to explain is not only its age, but the way it was buried. Each enclosure appears to have been intentionally filled with debris, including broken tools, animal bones, and soil, as if the builders chose to conceal their own work. This pattern repeats across multiple layers, with newer enclosures constructed above older ones, creating a stratified record of activity that spans centuries. The act of burial was not random or gradual, but deliberate and systematic, suggesting that the people who built these structures were following a process that held meaning, even if that meaning is no longer understood. Beneath the exposed enclosures, geophysical surveys have identified additional circular structures that remain unexcavated, their outlines detected through ground-penetrating radar. These buried formations appear larger and in some cases more complex than those already uncovered, raising the possibility that the earliest phase of construction lies deeper still. If confirmed, this would indicate that the visible monuments are only a later expression of a tradition that began earlier, perhaps with a different purpose or level of development that has yet to be revealed. The layout of the site itself suggests planning rather than gradual expansion. The enclosures are not randomly placed, but arranged in a way that indicates foresight and coordination, with central pillars facing one another as if part of a symbolic dialogue. Surrounding walls are constructed from carefully shaped stones, fitted together without mortar, forming enclosed spaces that may have been used for gatherings, rituals, or activities that required a defined boundary. Such an organisation implies a shared system of knowledge, one that could be transmitted and maintained over generations. Fragments found within the fill material provide further clues about the people behind these constructions. Flint tools, animal remains, and traces of plant use indicate a community that relied on hunting and foraging, yet operated with a level of stability that contradicts the idea of constant movement. The presence of grinding stones suggests the processing of wild grains, hinting at an early stage of food production that predates full agricultural systems. This transitional phase between mobility and settlement may have allowed for the coordination needed to construct and maintain such a site, Comparisons with other Neolithic locations in the region show that Gobekli Tepe was not entirely isolated, but it stands apart in scale and complexity. Nearby sites contain evidence of early habitation, yet none display the same concentration of monumental architecture. This disparity raises the possibility that the site served a specialised role, perhaps as a central gathering place for dispersed groups who shared cultural or spiritual connections. If so, the civilization responsible may not have been defined by a single settlement, but by a network of communities linked through shared practices. The deeper layers, however, remain largely untouched, and it is within these hidden sections that the most significant questions persist. The decision to leave large portions unexcavated reflects both the limitations of current methods and the recognition that future technologies may reveal details that would otherwise be lost. For now, the unseen structures exist as outlines beneath the soil, their full form and purpose concealed by time and deliberate human action. The concept of a buried origin challenges conventional narratives about the development of civilization. Rather than a gradual progression from simple to complex, the evidence at this site suggests that sophisticated behaviour may have appeared earlier than expected, emerging in ways that do not fit neatly into established models. The existence of an underlying layer implies that what is currently visible represents only a continuation of something older, a tradition already in motion before the first known pillars were raised. Environmental changes during this period may have influenced both the construction and the eventual burial of the site. As the climate shifted at the end of the last ice age, landscapes transformed and resources became more abundant in some areas while diminishing in others. These changes could have altered the way communities organised themselves, leading to new forms of cooperation, or conversely, the abandonment of older practices. The deliberate covering of the enclosures may reflect such a transition, marking the end of one phase and the beginning of another. Yet even with these considerations, the central mystery remains unresolved. The people who built these structures left no written records, no direct explanations of their intentions or beliefs. What survives are the stones, the carvings, and the layers of earth that conceal as much as they reveal. Each discovery adds detail but also deepens the sense that something fundamental is missing, a context that once made these actions clear but has since vanished. What lies beneath the deepest layers of Gobekli Tepe has not yet been seen. Excavations have only revealed a fraction of the site, and the deeper formations remain sealed beneath thousands of years of accumulated earth. Until those layers are carefully uncovered, the possibility remains that the true origins of the site belong to a civilization buried so completely that only fragments of its presence have reached the surface. And somewhere below the stone circles already uncovered, the first builders may still be waiting to be found. Doggerland, the civilization swallowed by the North Sea. Nothing in the waters of the North Sea suggests that an entire prehistoric world once stretched across its floor, occupied by communities that existed long before recorded history began. The surface reveals only shifting grey waves and distant horizons, offering no indication that beneath it lies the outline of a landmass that once connected continents. Long before coastlines settled into their present forms, this region supported human life across a wide and continuous landscape, one that has since been erased so completely that its existence must be reconstructed from fragments. What remains is not a visible ruin, but the absence of one. Fragments dragged up by fishing nets have offered the first unsettling clues, including animal bones, worked flint tools, and remnants of landscapes that should not exist beneath open water. These objects, recovered by chance rather than deliberate excavation, were at first treated as isolated curiosities. Yet over time, the accumulation of such finds began to suggest something larger, as if pieces of a submerged environment were being lifted to the surface without context. Among them were bones of large mammals, including species that once roamed open plains, alongside tools shaped by human hands, indicating that this was not an empty wilderness, but a place of repeated activity. Scattered discoveries across the seabed began to form a pattern as advances in marine surveying revealed outlines of ancient river channels, winding through what is now a submerged expanse. Seismic data and sonar imaging have traced the courses of rivers that once flowed across this landscape, carving valleys and feeding wetlands before disappearing beneath rising seas. These features, now preserved beneath layers of sediment, provide a framework for understanding how the land was structured, suggesting a terrain that supported both wildlife and human movement. The presence of these channels indicates that the area was not marginal, but central to prehistoric habitation. Long before the shoreline took its current shape, this region connected what are now the islands of Great Britain to mainland Europe, creating a vast and habitable plain. This connection allowed animals and human groups to move freely across a continuous stretch of land, following seasonal patterns and resource availability. The terrain is believed to have included rolling hills, river valleys, and low-lying wetlands, forming a diverse environment capable of sustaining life over extended periods. Rather than a narrow corridor, it was a broad landscape that shaped migration and settlement across northern Europe. Evidence suggests that this lost land, known as Doggerland, supported not just passing groups but stable communities that returned season after season. Archaeological interpretation of recovered materials points to repeated use of specific areas, indicating familiarity with the landscape and its resources. Tools found in clusters imply activity zones, while the distribution of artifacts suggests patterns of movement that were neither random nor isolated. This was not a transient crossing, but a place where human presence was sustained, organised, and tied to the rhythms of the environment. River systems once carried fresh water across the plain, feeding wetlands and forests where human activity left behind tools, hearths, and traces of sustained presence. The availability of water would have supported both plant and animal life, creating conditions suitable for habitation. Sediment cores taken from the seabed have revealed pollen and plant remains, allowing researchers to reconstruct ancient ecosystems that included woodlands and open grasslands. These environments would have provided food, shelter, and materials, reinforcing the idea that the region functioned as a stable habitat rather than a temporary refuge. Patterns of movement inferred from these findings indicate that people navigated this landscape with familiarity, following routes that vanished entirely as the waters advanced. The positioning of artifacts along former riverbanks and elevated areas suggests that pathways once existed, linking different parts of the region. These routes, shaped by geography and resource distribution, would have guided seasonal movement and interaction between groups. Over time, as rising waters altered the terrain, these pathways would have been disrupted, forcing adaptations that are only partially visible in the archaeological record. Gradual shifts in climate at the end of the last ice age began to reshape the terrain, transforming low-lying areas into marshes before they disappeared beneath rising seas. Melting ice sheets contributed to increasing sea levels, slowly inundating the land and altering its ecosystems. What had once been dry ground became saturated, then submerged, changing the conditions for both wildlife and human habitation. This process unfolded over generations, creating a landscape in transition, where familiar spaces were steadily reduced or transformed. At some point in this transformation, a massive underwater landslide known as the Storegga Slide may have triggered waves capable of devastating what remained of these settlements. Geological evidence indicates that this event generated a tsunami that impacted coastlines across the region, potentially accelerating the loss of habitable land. While the extent of its impact on human populations remains uncertain, it represents a moment when gradual change may have been interrupted by sudden disruption, compounding the effects of rising seas. What followed was not a single moment of destruction, but a prolonged retreat, as habitable ground diminished and the boundaries of the sea pushed steadily inward. Communities that once occupied central areas of the landscape would have found themselves moving toward higher ground, adapting to changing conditions as familiar territories disappeared. Over time, the remaining land would have become fragmented, reducing the space available for habitation and altering patterns of movement and interaction. Eventually, the process reached a point where the land itself could no longer support sustained human presence. All that remains of this vanished world exists in fragments and reconstructions, assembled from evidence that can never fully restore the land as it once was. The seabed preserves traces of rivers, plants, animals, and human activity, but these elements are disconnected from the lived experience they once formed. Each discovery adds detail, yet the full picture remains incomplete, shaped by absence as much as by what has been recovered. The civilization that once occupied this landscape is not remembered through structures or written records, but through the scattered remnants of a world that no longer exists. Beyond the reach of the tides that erased it, The shape of that lost civilization survives only in traces too scattered to ever be whole again. The Green Sahara Civilization. The Sahara spreads outward in endless dunes, yet beneath its sun-scorched surface lies evidence of lakes, rivers, and a civilization that thrived long before recorded history. Today the region appears inhospitable, a vast expanse of sand and rock, but the traces of human activity from the African humid period suggest a landscape that supported life on a scale far beyond what modern observers might expect. Satellite imagery and archaeological surveys have begun to reveal outlines of former river systems, lake beds, and settlement sites, offering glimpses of a world that existed for millennia before the desert claimed it. This was a place where humans established communities, organised their resources, and adapted to an environment now unrecognisable. Rock carvings etched into cliffs and stones depict hippos, crocodiles, and herds of cattle, hinting at a world far wetter and livelier than the present desert suggests. The depictions are not casual sketches but careful portrayals, suggesting that these animals held cultural or practical significance for the people who lived among them. Scenes of hunting and herding indicate a society attuned to its environment, capable of sustaining itself and understanding the cycles of nature. The art survives where erosion has spared it, offering an extraordinary window into the daily life and worldview of a population that vanished thousands of years ago. Sediment cores extracted from former lake beds reveal layers of silt and pollen that trace thousands of years when water shaped both landscape and human life. Analysis of these cores indicates periods of abundant rainfall and flourishing vegetation, interspersed with drier phases that gradually altered the region's ecology. Researchers have identified remnants of grasses, trees, and aquatic plants, confirming that lakes once dotted the terrain and that wetland ecosystems provided food and shelter for humans and animals alike. These environmental markers allow scientists to reconstruct a habitat capable of supporting complex human activity, long before the Sahara assumed its modern form. Fossilized fish scales and mollusk shells lie scattered across dry valleys, reminders that what seems inhospitable today once offered abundant food and fresh water. The presence of such remains, often found alongside stone tools, indicates that communities relied on a diverse diet and exploited the resources of rivers and lakes with skill and planning. Some of the shells come from freshwater species now extinct in the region, underscoring the dramatic environmental changes that transformed fertile plains into desert. Even small fragments tell a story of a world that was both productive and carefully managed by human hands. Archaeological surveys have uncovered traces of settlements nestled along these vanished waterways, including hearths, post holes, and enclosures suggesting repeated habitation. Excavations in former lake shores and river valleys have revealed evidence of dwellings and communal spaces, indicating that people returned to the same locations season after season. The arrangement of structures suggests planning and organisation rather than random placement, hinting at early social hierarchies or cooperative management. These discoveries reveal that the Sahara was once more than a transient stop for hunter-gatherers. It was a place where life was built to endure. Tools fashioned from stone and bone, found alongside remnants of domesticated cattle, indicate an early pastoral culture capable of organising both work and settlement. Polished stone axes, harpoons, grinding stones, and bone implements show that inhabitants could exploit multiple resources, from aquatic life to grazing animals, and even early forms of plant processing. Domesticated cattle bones and traces of herding pens suggest that animal husbandry was central to their economy, pointing to sophisticated knowledge of breeding and seasonal management. These tools and animal remains hint at a society with both practical skills and cultural traditions. Patterns of artifact distribution point to more than survival. They reveal the coordinated management of space, suggesting social structures that guided everyday life. Clusters of tools and household items indicate areas designated for specific activities, while proximity to water sources and elevated terrain suggests strategic planning for both defense and sustenance. The spatial organization of settlements and the apparent regularity of activity zones reflect an awareness of the landscape's possibilities and limitations. Even without written records, these patterns allow us to infer that the people of the Green Sahara civilization exercised social cohesion and practical foresight. As the African humid period waned, lakes receded and wetlands dried, gradually transforming a once thriving environment into increasingly hostile terrain. Rainfall became sporadic, rivers diminished, and grasslands slowly gave way to sand and rock. The climate shift was not sudden, but persistent and relentless, reshaping habitats and making once reliable food sources scarce. Archaeological layers reveal this transition through changes in settlement patterns, tool usage, and evidence of migration. The civilization adapted repeatedly, yet the environment itself began to dictate the limits of human habitation. Shrinking water sources forced communities to migrate, leaving behind homes and fields as familiar paths became impassable under scorching skies. Populations appear to have moved toward the Nile Valley and other river systems in search of water and fertile land, carrying traditions, tools, and knowledge with them. Abandoned settlements slowly deteriorated, their structures buried beneath shifting sands, leaving only remnants of walls, hearths, and post holes. As the desert expanded, it erased the physical signs of organized life while preserving hints of their existence for modern discovery. Evidence of adaptation appears in the archaeological record, with populations moving toward the Nile Valley and other regions where life could continue, leaving only traces behind. Rock art, tools, and scattered bones hint at journeys taken over long distances, as well as cultural continuity in new locations. While the original settlements disappeared beneath advancing desert sands, the people themselves persisted, carrying with them elements of their lost way of life that may have influenced later African civilizations. Even the simplest artifacts speak to resilience, survival, and memory. Today, the Green Sahara is a desert of sand and stone, masking the lakes, settlements, and social organization that once flourished within its boundaries. Satellite imagery, sediment analysis, and archaeological fieldwork have begun to reconstruct this vanished world, yet much remains mysterious. The traces that survive, scattered artifacts, dried riverbeds, and depictions of long-extinct fauna, serve as fragments of a civilization that adapted to a lush environment, only to see it transformed beyond recognition. The landscape conceals its past, offering glimpses while withholding a full picture of what once was. The land remains, but the civilization that once called it home exists only in shadows, waiting for those who can read its hidden memory. Sundaland, the drowned continent of Southeast Asia. Where today shallow waters conceal distant islands, fertile plains and dense forests once stretched across Sundaland, sustaining communities that existed long before recorded history. Modern maps reveal nothing of the vast interconnected landmass that once linked what are now separate islands, yet geological and archaeological studies suggest it was home to dense human populations. These societies were not scattered nomads, but organised communities that thrived in a landscape abundant with rivers, lakes, and forested corridors, all of which facilitated sustenance, travel, and interaction. The contrast between the verdant past and the submerged present heightens the mystery, leaving only fragments of a once lively continent waiting to be rediscovered. Ancient river valleys, traced through geological and sediment studies, reveal landscapes rich with freshwater sources, open meadows and sheltered groves that supported both humans and wildlife. Seismic mapping and sediment cores suggest that these rivers branched extensively, creating fertile plains and lagoons, while patches of high ground provided safe places for settlements. The arrangement of waterways would have allowed not only irrigation and fishing, but also the movement of people and goods across long distances. This intricate network hints at a society intimately connected with its environment, one whose survival and growth depended on careful observation and management of natural resources. Pollen, plant remains and soil cores show evidence of lush vegetation, indicating that the land was capable of sustaining diverse crops, foraging and pastoral activity over millennia. Grasslands interspersed with groves of trees and fertile alluvial soil suggest agriculture was feasible in multiple locations, while forests would have provided both food and materials for construction. Archaeobotanical studies reveal the presence of both wild and domesticated plants, reflecting a people who understood how to manipulate and conserve their surroundings. These botanical traces, preserved beneath layers of silt, offer a rare glimpse into an environment that has been lost to rising seas, yet once nurtured complex human life. Remnants of stone tools, pottery shards, and fossilized animal bones suggest thriving settlements, carefully placed to exploit abundant resources and navigable waterways. Harpoons, fishing hooks, and grinding stones indicate that these communities harnessed both terrestrial and aquatic resources, while the presence of pottery hints at storage, food preparation, and possibly ceremonial practices. Bones of large mammals, fish, and birds reveal a diet balance between hunting, fishing, and gathering, implying that people were attuned to seasonal cycles and resource availability. The density and sophistication of these artifacts point to organised, persistent human activity rather than brief or incidental occupation. Archaeological surveys indicate repeated occupation along these fertile corridors, with traces of dwellings, hearths, and communal spaces hinting at organised societies. Excavation of high ground near former riverbanks reveals post holes, arranged in geometric patterns, suggesting planned construction and shared social space. Hearths, along with discarded tools and food remains, indicate consistent multi-generational habitation. Such evidence reveals that Sundaland was more than a collection of scattered settlements. It was a living landscape where human communities interacted with each other and the environment in structured, sustainable ways. Patterns in artifact distribution reveal intentional placement and use of space, implying social coordination, trade, and cultural interaction across the continent. Objects found far from their raw material sources suggest early trade networks or seasonal migration patterns, while repeated architectural arrangements indicate shared cultural norms or community organisation. These subtle patterns, deciphered from centuries-old deposits now submerged, suggest societies capable of long-term planning and cooperation, hinting at cultural complexity that may have influenced subsequent civilizations in the region. Early signs of maritime activity appear in the archaeological record, with fishing implements and coastal settlements pointing to human adaptation that bridged land and water. Shell middens, canoe-shaped impressions, and evidence of salt production suggest that communities engaged with the shallow seas surrounding Sundaland, exploiting its resources and perhaps navigating between islands even before global sea level rise dramatically reshaped the region. These adaptations reflect a population skilled in both terrestrial and aquatic environments, capable of living across diverse terrains and responding to shifting conditions with ingenuity. As global temperatures rose and ice sheets melted, shorelines gradually shifted, inundating plains, forests, and settlements, forcing communities to relocate while leaving subtle traces behind. This rise in sea level did not erase the land overnight. Instead, it transformed it over centuries, slowly fragmenting forests and settlements, creating estuaries and lagoons where once there were fields and groves. Archaeological layers reveal the gradual abandonment of coastal settlements, the relocation of populations, and the retreat toward higher ground, emphasizing both the persistence and vulnerability of human societies in the face of environmental change. Some groups moved toward elevated terrain or nearby islands, carrying knowledge, tools, and traditions that would later influence human populations across Southeast Asia. Cultural continuity is hinted at through similarities in stone tools, pottery styles, and subsistence practices in regions far from Sundaland's former heartland. These migrations would have spread both technological and cultural innovations, leaving a subtle but enduring imprint on the populations that succeeded them. Even as the continent sank beneath the rising seas, its people ensured that elements of their civilization survived beyond the land itself. Today, careful mapping and underwater exploration reveal outlines of ancient rivers, coastlines, and settlement patterns that hint at the continent's former scale and vitality. Sonar imaging and dredged sediments have begun to reconstruct a picture of Sundaland as a sprawling network of fertile plains, interconnected waterways, and dense populations. Yet much remains obscured beneath meters of ocean, and only a small fraction of the land story can be pieced together. Each discovery deepens the mystery, revealing a civilization both familiar in its human ingenuity and alien in its sudden disappearance beneath the waves. While most of Sundaland now rests beneath the waves, the remnants of its human activity endure, echoing the richness of a civilization largely hidden from view. The traces of dwellings, tools, and ecological management suggest societies that were advanced, adaptive, and capable of thriving in diverse environments, yet their physical presence has been largely erased by the ocean. The challenge for modern researchers is not only to recover these remnants, but also to understand the scale and complexity of human life in a region that has been submerged for thousands of years. Beneath the calm seas that cover it, Sundaland waits silently, a drowned world whose full story remains just out of reach for those who seek to uncover it. The Amazon's hidden earthwork civilization. From above, the Amazon appears endless and untamed, yet beneath the dense green canopy lie vast geometric shapes that reveal a civilization that existed long before recorded history. The forest conceals not only trees and rivers, but the outlines of human ingenuity, carefully etched into the earth thousands of years ago. For centuries, explorers and scientists assumed the Amazon was a sparsely populated wilderness, incapable of sustaining large organized communities, but recent discoveries challenged that view, suggesting that entire societies flourished here, constructing plazas, roads, and mounds that rival the scale of better-known civilizations elsewhere. The mystery is amplified by the living forest itself, which grows over and conceals what was once a remarkably structured landscape. Aerial LiDAR surveys have pierced the forest cover, exposing circular plazas, straight roads, and massive mounds that hint at organized societies carefully shaping the landscape. By scanning the ground with laser pulses, researchers have revealed geometric patterns invisible from the jungle floor, where centuries of growth have masked human intervention. These remote sensing techniques have uncovered networks of earthworks stretching across hundreds of kilometers, evidence that human presence was widespread and deliberate rather than sporadic or incidental. Each straight line, each circular enclosure, suggests planning, coordination, and a vision of communal organization that was extraordinary for a pre-Columbian environment, often imagined as wild and unstructured. Satellite imagery and ground reconnaissance confirm that these structures are not random but deliberate, designed with precision and aligned across vast distances. When investigators visit the sites, they find terraced earth, artificially raised platforms, and causeways linking different complexes. These constructions suggest more than survival. They indicate that communities engaged in social and ceremonial activities, organizing labor and space with intent. The consistent geometry, the repeated forms, and the regularity of connections across distances imply governance, cultural norms, and the ability to coordinate work on scales that challenge previous assumptions about prehistoric Amazonian societies. Soil analysis reveals fertile patches enriched by human activity, indicating that the rainforest was not merely inhabited, but actively managed to sustain large populations. These anthropogenic soils, known as terra preta, are unusually dark and rich in nutrients, unlike the typically poor Amazonian soils, and they persist for centuries. By studying these soils, archaeologists have traced the areas where people farmed, indicating sustained and intensive agricultural practices. The existence of these soils suggests a civilization that understood ecological balance, deliberately enriching the land to ensure reliable harvests and long-term sustenance in a challenging tropical environment. The scale of the earthworks suggests coordinated labor and social hierarchy, with communities capable of planning and executing projects that spanned kilometers. Large mounds and plazas would have required extensive manpower to construct, implying organizational structures that allocated tasks, managed resources, and maintained communal cohesion. The geometric precision of these sites indicates that knowledge was shared across generations, preserved through teaching and practice, allowing societies to execute projects that combine practical function with social or ceremonial significance. This scale of labor points to the presence of structured leadership and collective ambition, hallmarks of complex societies, even in regions previously considered marginal. Archaeologists have uncovered remnants of pathways and causeways connecting mounds and plazas, hinting at structured settlements and possible ceremonial or administrative functions. These routes may have facilitated movement, trade, or ritual processions, linking residential areas with communal or ceremonial centers. The existence of such networks demonstrates that the civilization was not a series of isolated villages, but a connected landscape in which human activity was coordinated, purposeful, and likely symbolic. Even today, these causeways emerge from the forest floor, subtle yet deliberate traces of a people who shaped their world with both practicality and cultural intent. Terraces, canals, and constructed ponds demonstrate that these people manipulated the terrain to manage water, enhance agriculture, and mitigate flooding in the rainforest. By elevating living areas, directing water flow, and creating reservoirs, the civilization ensured food production and habitation stability in a landscape subject to seasonal inundation. These engineering feats indicate knowledge of hydrology, soils, and landscape management, all integrated into a coherent strategy for long-term settlement. The sophistication of these interventions points to an intimate understanding of the environment and an ability to harmonize human activity with the natural rhythms of the Amazon. Evidence of terra preta, the fertile anthropogenic soil, shows that communities integrated ecological knowledge into urban planning, creating sustainable systems that endured for centuries. This soil, rich in charcoal, organic matter, and nutrients, reflects deliberate human intervention designed to enrich otherwise infertile ground. Settlements were strategically located on or near these enriched soils, allowing populations to grow and thrive in a tropical rainforest. The presence of these soils underlines the civilization's ability to transform the environment in sustainable ways, blending human ingenuity with the rhythms of the forest, rather than replacing or destroying it. Despite centuries of jungle growth, certain alignments of earthworks suggest astronomical or calendrical awareness, revealing sophisticated observation of the natural world. Some plazas and roads align with solstices or cardinal directions, suggesting that these societies not only planned spatially but temporally, marking seasonal cycles or ritual events. The careful orientation of structures indicates intentional design beyond practical concerns, incorporating cosmology and cultural knowledge into the landscape itself. Such precision hints at a sophisticated intellectual and spiritual life, now mostly hidden beneath the forest canopy, its meaning partially decipherable yet still tantalizingly obscure. Modern exploration has barely scratched the surface. Much of the network remains obscured, leaving researchers to piece together the civilization's scale and cultural complexity from fragmentary evidence. Dense vegetation, shifting rivers, and centuries of sediment accumulation have masked countless sites. While the sheer size of the Amazon makes comprehensive surveying difficult, each discovery prompts more questions. How many communities existed? How were they connected? And what beliefs or governance systems guided their construction? The partial visibility of the earthworks keeps the civilization enigmatic, teasing scholars with hints of order and scale that remain largely unreadable from ground level. While the forest hides most of its secrets, the surviving mounds and plazas testify to a society that was both vast and intricately organized, challenging assumptions about pre-Columbian Amazonian life. The combination of agricultural management, engineering, and geometric planning suggests that humans here achieved a level of sophistication comparable to more traditionally recognized civilizations. Yet the full extent of their achievement remains obscured by the jungle, leaving only fragments for modern science to interpret. The mystery of the Amazon's hidden earthwork civilization endures, reminding us that complex societies can thrive in places previously thought inhospitable, and that their traces may be invisible until carefully sought. Even as the canopy conceals most of its achievements, the Amazon's hidden earthwork civilization continues to whisper its existence, waiting for those who can decipher its intricate patterns. The first builders of Malta's megalithic temples. Massive stone structures stand across the islands of Malta, their scale and complexity pointing to a civilization that existed long before recorded history, yet left behind no written explanation of its achievements. From the moment one first observes these sites, the sheer audacity of their construction is striking. The temples rise directly from the ground, unyielding, imposing, as though the people who built them were communicating through stone itself. There are no ruins to suggest gradual evolution, no nearby settlements to indicate an obvious source of labour or resources. Instead, what remains is a testament to skill, planning, and an understanding of materials and geometry that defies conventional assumptions about prehistoric island societies. Towering limestone blocks, some weighing several tons, were shaped and positioned with a level of precision that raises immediate questions about the methods used to construct them. Scholars have long debated how these prehistoric builders quarried, transported, and erected stones without advanced machinery. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that moving even a single block with simple tools requires careful planning, teamwork, and considerable manpower. Yet the consistency across sites hints at standardized methods, suggesting that knowledge was preserved and transmitted with extraordinary care. Each block's placement is deliberate, leaving little room for chance, and even minor deviations would disrupt the overall harmony of the structures. Curved outer walls enclose carefully planned interiors where massive stones are fitted together without mortar, forming spaces that have endured for thousands of years. The walls curve in subtle arcs, creating enclosures that guide movement within the temple, channel acoustics, and frame central areas. Chambers are interconnected with a symmetry that appears intentional, forming patterns repeated across multiple temple complexes. This architectural consistency indicates a society capable of long-term planning and communal cooperation. Visitors today are often struck by the way the spaces feel alive with purpose, as though each wall and corridor was meant to interact with human presence in a specific, meaningful way. Entrance passages align with specific orientations, suggesting that placement was deliberate rather than incidental, guided by knowledge that is no longer fully understood. Some entrances correspond to the rising or setting sun during particular times of the year, hinting at ceremonial, agricultural, or astronomical significance. Observations like these point to a sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles and celestial phenomena, indicating that these communities observed the natural world with care and integrated it into their architecture. The precision of alignment cannot easily be attributed to chance, further reinforcing the idea that these temples were both functional and symbolic, bridging the material and the spiritual. Interior chambers branch outward in symmetrical patterns, creating layouts that appear consistent across multiple temple sites, despite being built in different locations. Each complex mirrors others in its repetition of apses, corridors, and focal points, suggesting shared cultural norms or religious practices. The uniformity implies that construction was guided by rules or templates, not solely by the intuition of individual builders. This level of design sophistication points to a civilization capable of coordinating labour, transmitting knowledge, and maintaining architectural standards across generations, even within isolated islands separated by the Mediterranean. Repeated architectural features, including apses and central corridors, indicate that these structures followed established design principles rather than isolated experimentation. Their scale and form imply not only skilled craftsmanship but also a shared vision of communal space and ritual. Archaeologists have noted that the similarities in layout extend to proportions and dimensions, as though the temples were built according to an underlying system of measurement. This standardization suggests intellectual frameworks that predate written records, raising questions about how prehistoric societies developed and preserved such knowledge in relative isolation. Stone altars and carved figurines discovered within these spaces suggest that the temples served purposes beyond shelter, possibly connected to ritual or communal activity. Figurines often depict abstract or stylized human forms, emphasizing fertility, life cycles, or symbolic representations rather than everyday life. Altars indicate centralized areas for offerings or ceremonies, suggesting that these communities invested significant time and resources into structured cultural practices. Each artifact provides a fragmentary glimpse into a society whose values, beliefs, and social structure are otherwise largely invisible, leaving modern observers to infer meaning from material evidence alone. Decorative elements, though limited, show deliberate craftsmanship, with patterns and engravings that hint at symbolic meaning rather than simple ornamentation. Carvings on stones include spirals, discs, and abstract motifs that recur across multiple sites, suggesting shared iconography or religious symbolism. The subtlety of these decorations reflects intentional design rather than mere embellishment, implying that the builders conveyed ideas visually and conceptually through the architecture itself. These patterns, combined with spatial layout, indicate a civilization capable of sophisticated communication, expression, and ritualized thought, all without leaving a written record. Isolated within the Mediterranean, these islands show little evidence of earlier development that would explain how such advanced construction techniques emerged so early. Unlike continental regions where gradual cultural evolution might account for architectural sophistication, Malta presents a sudden appearance of monumental stonework. There are no nearby sites of comparable complexity predating the temples, making the origin of this civilization even more enigmatic. The island's geographical isolation highlights the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the builders, who developed advanced construction methods and cultural practices seemingly independently. The absence of written records leaves the identity of the builders uncertain, forcing interpretations to rely entirely on the physical evidence that remains. Archaeologists are left to reconstruct social organisation, labour systems and belief structures from stone alone. Every wall, every alignment, every carving becomes a critical clue in piecing together an otherwise silent civilization. This reliance on material evidence adds to the mystery, as the temples themselves become the sole witnesses to a society whose voices are forever lost. Despite extensive study, the purpose and methods behind these temples remain only partially understood, with each structure offering answers that lead to further questions. The combination of scale, precision, and cultural integration continues to challenge assumptions about prehistoric societies in Europe. These monuments stand as enduring evidence of human capability and intentionality, yet the story of the people who built them is tantalizingly incomplete, leaving a tension between admiration for their skill and the profound absence of explanatory context. The stones still stand in silent precision, preserving the work of a civilization whose knowledge can be seen but not fully known. The forgotten society of the Caucasus dolmens. Scattered across the rugged slopes and valleys of the Caucasus Mountains, thousands of stone dolmens mark the presence of a civilization that existed long before recorded history, yet left behind little explanation for its purpose. The landscape is dotted with these ancient megaliths, some perched on windswept ridges, others hidden among sparse trees or overlooking narrow valleys. Each dolmen stands as a silent witness to human effort, imposing and mysterious in its isolation. Despite centuries of study, the people who built them remain enigmatic, known only through the enduring traces of their monumental work. The scale and dispersion of the structures immediately signal a society that was both organised and deeply connected to the land. Remote hillsides and forest clearings reveal these structures in isolation, their placement often far from easy access, suggesting deliberate positioning rather than convenience. Traversing the mountains today, one encounters slabs arranged atop hills that are difficult to reach, their construction requiring coordination, planning, and stamina. The effort to move massive stones across uneven terrain implies a population capable of mobilizing labor in complex ways, yet no settlements of comparable sophistication have been reliably identified nearby. The dolmens' locations hint at cultural or ritual priorities, emphasizing the importance of site selection that transcended practical concerns. Across wide stretches of terrain, clusters of dolmens appear in patterns that hint at coordination, even as the distances between them challenge simple explanations. Some are arranged in loose groupings across plateaus, while others trace natural contours, forming lines or arcs that echo the land's topography. This apparent order contrasts sharply with the seeming randomness of some isolated structures, suggesting that a shared cultural logic guided construction even in the most remote areas. The sheer number of dolmens, estimates in the thousands, speaks to a civilization capable of sustained effort and complex social organisation, all of which remains largely invisible to the historical record. Massive stone slabs, carefully cut and assembled, form chambered structures whose construction would have required both planning and sustained labour. Each dolmen consists of upright stone supporting horizontal capstones, creating enclosed spaces that have endured for millennia. The physical demands of cutting, transporting and lifting such stones, without metal tools or wheeled vehicles, would have been immense. Yet the uniformity of many structures shows deliberate attention to stability and longevity. These monuments suggest a society that combined technical ingenuity with collective coordination, executing monumental works that persist far beyond their creators' lifetimes. Circular openings carved into the front stones of many dolmens suggest controlled access, raising questions about who entered and for what reason. The portals are often low and narrow, implying that those who passed through were subject to ritualized movement or symbolic significance. Some openings align with sunlight or moonlight at particular times of the year, hinting at an awareness of celestial cycles. Whether these spaces were for the living or the dead, the precise craftsmanship of each opening demonstrates that form and function were carefully considered, even as the deeper meaning has been lost to time. Excavations around some sites have uncovered human remains and artifacts, leading to theories that these structures served funerary or ritual functions. Skeletal fragments, pottery shards, and simple stone tools provide glimpses into daily life and spiritual practice, yet they reveal little about governance, social hierarchy, or written communication. The variation in remains, some fully interred, others partial or symbolic, indicates diverse purposes, leaving archaeologists to infer meaning from limited evidence. Each dolmen, in this sense, becomes a fragment of a larger cultural puzzle, its significance both tangible and frustratingly elusive. Variations in design, from simple box-like chambers to more complex constructions, indicate that the builders followed flexible traditions rather than a single rigid blueprint. Some dolmens are rectangular, others slightly trapezoidal, certain capstones are plain, while others show subtle markings or grooves. This variety suggests adaptation to local terrain, materials, and possibly ceremonial intent. The presence of recurring elements amidst diversity points to shared cultural norms, yet the absence of explanatory records leaves interpretation largely speculative. The builders' choices reflect both creativity and cultural continuity, hinting at a society aware of its own architectural identity. Certain dolmens appear aligned with natural features such as mountain ridges, rivers, or distant horizons, implying that their placement held meaning beyond mere practicality. Some orientations suggest observational use, perhaps related to seasonal changes, resource cycles, or symbolic geography. Others may have been intended to communicate visually across valleys, creating an unseen network that connected disparate communities. The interplay between placement, terrain, and environmental cues indicates that these structures were not isolated monuments, but part of a broader cultural landscape carefully embedded in the natural world. Despite these patterns, many structures seem isolated or irregular, resisting attempts to define a unified purpose or cultural system. In some valleys, dolmens appear in near-complete randomness, challenging any single theory of ritual, burial, or political control. The coexistence of order and apparent chaos within the same region emphasizes the complexity of the society that produced them, suggesting local variation or a multiplicity of functions that cannot be easily reconciled. This tension between pattern and irregularity enhances the enigmatic presence of the dolmens, leaving observers to question what principles guided their creation. The absence of written records leaves the identity of the builders uncertain, forcing modern interpretation to rely entirely on the physical evidence that remains. No inscriptions or documents survive to explain why the dolmens were constructed, who commissioned them, or how knowledge of their construction was preserved across generations. Archaeologists must infer cultural practices from layout, construction methods, and associated artifacts, yet each inference is necessarily provisional. This lack of historical voice heightens the sense of mystery, as the stones themselves remain the only direct testimony to a society that has vanished from memory. What survives today is a landscape marked by stone chambers whose scale and distribution suggest a society both organized and enigmatic. Travelers through the Caucasus encounter these dolmens as enduring markers of human presence, a testament to ingenuity and ritual consciousness that transcends centuries. They endure in silent defiance of the passage of time, hinting at social cohesion and cultural sophistication that modern frameworks can only partially reconstruct. The dolmens provoke awe not merely for their physicality, but for the persistent absence of the people who built them, leaving a tension between knowledge and uncertainty that remains unresolved. Across the silent ridges and valleys, the dolmens endure as quiet markers of a civilization whose purpose remains just beyond understanding. The prehistoric culture beneath Lake Titicaca. Traces of human life emerge in the waters of Lake Titicaca, hinting at a civilization that thrived long before recorded history. Archaeologists exploring the lake's depths have uncovered stone platforms, terraces, and foundations that suggest structured communities. Unlike surface settlements that leave clear signs of occupation, these remains are preserved under layers of silt and sediment, concealed from easy view. Each discovery provides only fragments of a larger story, suggesting the presence of organized human activity without revealing the full scope of those who lived here. The mystery deepens with every dive, as submerged structures stretch across areas once thought to be empty waters. Artifacts recovered from the lakebed suggest communities capable of complex organization, leaving evidence of tools, pottery, and ceremonial items. Pottery shards exhibit stylistic patterns distinct from later civilizations of the Andes, hinting at unique cultural practices. Stone implements, carefully crafted and deliberately shaped, reflect not only utilitarian purpose, but also a sophisticated understanding of material and form. The distribution of these artifacts suggests communal spaces and specialized areas within settlements, indicating planning and social coordination that speak to a people both resourceful and socially intricate. Submerged walls and platforms reveal purposeful construction, each stone carefully positioned to endure both water and time. The terraces are often low, yet broad, forming platforms that may have supported dwellings or communal structures. The precision of placement is remarkable, particularly given the technological limitations of prehistoric societies. Each wall and foundation appears calculated, reflecting knowledge of weight distribution and stability. The sheer effort required to arrange these stones underwater underscores a community capable of cooperation and foresight, whose legacy now lies quietly beneath the lake's calm surface. The scale of some terraces implies coordinated labour and planning, a society with knowledge and skills that modern understanding struggles to explain. Large stone blocks, moved without wheels or metal tools, suggest methods lost to time. Some constructions span dozens of meters, forming a network of terraces that could have supported hundreds of inhabitants. The level of ambition required indicates not sporadic occupation, but sustained settlement, likely maintained for generations. It is a testament to ingenuity and social cohesion, a civilization whose labour endures silently beneath the water, unseen yet profoundly telling. Pottery fragments and carved stones hint at rituals and social practices that once structured daily life, yet their meaning is largely lost. Certain ceramics show signs of symbolic decoration, perhaps denoting status, clan affiliation, or religious belief. Carved stones, sometimes found in alignment with other platforms, suggest ceremonial or sacred significance. These artifacts form a tantalizing link to human activity, yet they resist precise interpretation, leaving modern observers to wonder at the purposes, beliefs, and values of a society whose voice has been largely submerged. Some artifacts indicate a hierarchy or specialized roles, suggesting these communities were more than simple settlements. Variations in material quality, craftsmanship, and placement hint at differentiated labor or social ranking. Certain terraces appear to have been communal or administrative, while others may have served ritual or domestic functions. The evidence paints a picture of a society capable of organization, leadership, and cultural complexity, an early civilization whose achievements remain underappreciated and whose social structures are hidden beneath the lake's placid surface. The design of terraces and chambers reflects adaptation to environmental changes, demonstrating intelligence in engineering and foresight. Rising and falling water levels would have posed constant challenges, yet the builders seem to have constructed platforms that remained functional over time. Some structures incorporate natural ridges or underwater features to enhance stability, while others appear deliberately elevated above surrounding sediment. Such adaptability suggests a deep understanding of local conditions, combined with an ability to plan for both short-term needs and long-term survival. Patterns among submerged structures hint at intentional orientation, possibly for ceremonial, practical, or astronomical purposes, though certainty remains out of reach. Certain terraces align with islands, channels, or distant shores, hinting at navigational or ritual significance. Others may correspond to solar or seasonal markers, linking community activities to the cycles of the natural world. Yet the fragmentary nature of evidence leaves open multiple interpretations, emphasizing the profound challenge of reconstructing a culture known only through the contours of its stonework and the occasional artifact retrieved from beneath centuries of water. Irregular arrangements and isolated platforms resist explanation, emphasizing the incomplete picture left by time and water. Some terraces lie apart from larger clusters, their purpose unclear, suggesting that the civilization may have included outlying settlements or specialized sites. The uneven distribution resists a single unifying theory, forcing modern observers to acknowledge both the ingenuity and the elusiveness of these prehistoric builders. Every dive and sonar survey reveals additional anomalies, hinting at activity that may never be fully understood. Without written records or inscriptions, the civilization's identity and culture must be inferred solely from the material traces that remain. Modern researchers rely on architecture, artifact analysis, and environmental study to piece together a narrative of human ingenuity and societal organization. Yet despite technological advances, the lack of direct testimony from the people themselves keeps the society shrouded in mystery. Interpretations are necessarily provisional, reliant on fragmentary evidence, and always open to revision as new discoveries emerge from the lake's depths. Even now, evidence of human ingenuity lies beneath the water, speaking silently of a society whose stories have been swallowed by time. Each submerged terrace, wall, and artifact testifies to a people capable of construction, organization, and cultural expression, yet whose existence was obscured by natural forces. The lake preserves them in silence, leaving only traces of lives once lived, communities once organized, and societies whose ingenuity still invites wonder. The depths conceal these submerged settlements, preserving the silent testimony of a civilization that vanished before history could ever name it. Pumapunku before Tiwanaku. Measurements taken from the structures at Pumapunku reveal a level of precision that raises the possibility of a civilization existing long before recorded history. Each dimension, each angle, and each surface appears to conform to a standard that feels deliberate rather than approximate. The consistency suggests not only skill, but a system of knowledge applied repeatedly across multiple elements. This level of control challenges assumptions about the capabilities of early Andean societies and introduces a more unsettling question: whether the people credited with the site's construction were truly its original builders. Angles remain consistent across multiple surfaces, suggesting that each cut was made with careful control rather than approximation. Edges intersect cleanly, forming corners that maintain uniformity even after centuries of exposure. Such precision implies the use of techniques capable of producing straight lines and exact geometries, something difficult to achieve without specialized tools or methods. While stoneworking was known in ancient cultures, the degree of accuracy observed here appears unusually refined, hinting at knowledge that extends beyond what is typically associated with the region's early inhabitants. Identical dimensions appear repeatedly, indicating that construction followed a system rather than isolated effort. Blocks seem to conform to shared measurements, as though they were produced according to a template or standardized plan. This repetition suggests an organized approach to construction, where components were designed to fit together in predictable ways. The presence of such uniformity raises the possibility of advanced planning and communication within the society responsible, yet no written records survive to explain how such coordination was achieved or transmitted across generations. Connections between blocks demonstrate interlocking techniques that require exact alignment to function as intended. Grooves, recesses, and protrusions appear carefully positioned, allowing stones to fit together with minimal gaps. These features suggest an understanding of structural stability and mechanical design, where each component contributes to the integrity of the whole. The precision of these connections is particularly striking, as even slight miscalculations would compromise their effectiveness, yet many remain intact despite the passage of time. Modular forms, most notably the distinctive H-shaped components, imply that each piece was designed to integrate into a larger structural plan. These shapes are not random, they repeat with consistent proportions, indicating a deliberate system of construction. The modularity suggests that structures may have been assembled from pre-shaped components, allowing for efficiency and scalability. Such an approach reflects a level of conceptual thinking that goes beyond simple building practices, hinting at a broader architectural vision that remains only partially understood. Material analysis shows that dense andesite was transported from distant sources, pointing to a coordinated and labor-intensive process. The movement of such heavy material over significant distances would have required planning, manpower, and knowledge of terrain. Andesite, known for its durability and difficulty to work, presents additional challenges in shaping and finishing. The choice of this material suggests that the builders prioritized strength and longevity, yet it also raises questions about how they managed the logistical demands of quarrying, transport, and precise placement. Estimates of weight and placement suggest that lifting and positioning required methods that are not fully understood today. Some blocks weigh several tons, yet they are positioned with a level of accuracy that implies careful control during placement. Without evidence of wheels or advanced lifting devices, the techniques used remain speculative. The effort required to achieve such results indicates not only physical capability, but also organizational structure, where groups of individuals work together toward a shared objective guided by knowledge that has since been lost. Evidence of partially completed cuts indicates that some work was left unfinished, as though construction halted unexpectedly. Certain stones bear marks of shaping that were never completed, while others appear to have been abandoned mid-process. These incomplete elements offer rare insight into the methods used, revealing stages of construction that are otherwise hidden. At the same time, they introduce a sense of interruption, suggesting that whatever system or society supported this work may have been disrupted before its plans could be fully realized. Disruption in arrangement suggests that the original configuration no longer survives intact, leaving only fragments of a larger design. Many blocks are scattered or misaligned, their original positions difficult to reconstruct with certainty. This fragmentation obscures the intended structure, forcing modern interpretation to rely on partial evidence. The current layout may not reflect the builder's original vision, complicating efforts to understand the full scope and purpose of the site. What remains is both revealing and incomplete, offering clues while withholding resolution. Attribution to the Tiwanaku culture introduces uncertainty, as the precision observed does not always align with established expectations. While Tiwanaku is known for its architectural achievements, some researchers question whether the techniques seen at Pumapunku fully correspond with what is known of that civilization. This discrepancy has led to debates about whether the site represents a peak of Tiwanaku innovation or the legacy of an earlier, less understood culture whose influence has been absorbed into the historical record. The overall pattern presents a contradiction, where the level of sophistication challenges the timeline used to explain it. Each detail, precision, standardization, material choice, and construction technique suggests a system of knowledge that feels out of place within the accepted framework. This tension between evidence and explanation remains unresolved, leaving open the possibility that Pumapunku preserves traces of a civilization whose contributions have not been fully recognized or accurately attributed. What remains suggests a level of knowledge that does not fully align with the civilization credited for it, leaving open the possibility that its true origins lie further back in time. The earliest farmers of the Fertile Crescent. At some point, groups of people began returning to the same ground within the Fertile Crescent, hinting at a civilization that was forming long before recorded history could describe it. Rather than moving constantly in search of food, these early communities began to linger, choosing favourable locations with fertile soil and access to water. The decision to remain in one place, however subtle, represents a profound shift in human behaviour, one that laid the foundation for organised settlement and ultimately civilization itself. Archaeological evidence from hearths to post holes suggests that these dwellings were not temporary shelters, but the precursors to structured communities. Repeated occupation of specific locations suggests that movement gradually gave way to stability, marking a subtle but lasting change in human behaviour. Layers of refuse and remnants of fires indicate continuous habitation over generations, hinting at careful planning and knowledge of the land. These groups began to develop rhythms dictated by the seasons, aligning daily life with cycles of growth, rainfall, and migration patterns of wild game. Even the arrangement of dwellings suggests intentional planning, with spaces for communal activity, storage, and private life, reflecting early social organisation and foresight. Food was no longer gathered only from what the land provided naturally, as evidence points to deliberate planting and seasonal harvesting. Flint sickles, grinding stones, and impressions of domesticated seeds in ancient soil indicate that humans were beginning to cultivate crops rather than rely solely on foraging. This act of controlling food production, small as it may have seemed at first, represented a fundamental change in the relationship between humans and the environment. For the first time, survival depended not only on knowledge of where to find resources, but on the ability to manage and reproduce them over time. Seeds selected and stored from previous harvests indicate an emerging understanding of cultivation and long-term planning. Archaeologists have found charred remains of wheat and barley, carefully preserved, suggesting that early farmers intentionally saved the best seeds for the next planting cycle. This practice hints at abstract thinking, anticipating the future and managing risk long before writing or recorded history existed. The foresight required to plan a harvest for months ahead demonstrates a level of cognition and societal coordination rarely attributed to prehistory. Tools adapted for cutting and grinding reveal that daily life was beginning to revolve around the processing of cultivated crops. Grinding stones show wear consistent with repeated use, while small flint blades appear crafted specifically for harvesting grain. These innovations were not isolated inventions, but part of a broader behavioural pattern, reflecting a community gradually adapting to its new way of life. Each tool, each modification, represents an incremental step towards civilization, an evolution in human ingenuity that was quietly reshaping society without leaving a written record. Storage pits and communal spaces suggest that resources were shared, requiring cooperation and coordination within growing groups. Early farmers could not succeed in isolation. The maintenance of crops, protection of stored grain, and distribution of resources demanded a collective approach. Excavations reveal storage arrangements that indicate planning and a rudimentary understanding of logistics, demonstrating that the organisation of space paralleled the organisation of society. The emergence of shared responsibility points to an unrecorded social hierarchy and the beginnings of cooperative structures that would support larger populations. Knowledge of planting cycles and environmental patterns appears to have been passed between generations without written record. Seasonal rhythms were understood and observed, yet the methods by which this knowledge travelled remain a mystery. Whether communicated through demonstration, oral instruction, or ritual, these early teachings allowed communities to thrive despite challenges posed by droughts, pests, or climate variation. The sophistication embedded in these behavioural patterns reveals that civilization did not emerge suddenly, but through careful observation, experimentation, and cumulative knowledge. Roles within these early communities likely became more defined, as consistent food production required organised labour and responsibility. Some individuals may have focused on planting and tending crops, while others prepared tools, managed storage, or oversaw communal needs. Evidence from dwellings suggests that the division of labour extended to domestic and social activities as well, reflecting an early social structure. These emergent roles, though primitive compared to later civilizations, demonstrate a level of organisation that enabled communities to endure and expand in a way that transient foragers could not. Settlements expanded gradually, indicating that these early farming groups were not temporary, but increasingly permanent. Archaeological layers reveal the slow accretion of materials, debris, and structural remnants, illustrating that humans were beginning to modify the landscape to suit their needs. Over time, these settlements grew larger and more complex, forming networks of interrelated communities. The process was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it set in motion patterns of habitation, labour, and social cohesion that would eventually lead to cities, states, and recorded history. The transformation occurred without a clear starting point, leaving the origins of this shift difficult to trace with certainty. Unlike the sudden construction of monumental structures, the emergence of farming and settlement leaves behind only subtle traces. Hearths, post holes, and storage pits mark the passage of time and behaviour, but they do not explain why the change happened at that place or in that era. The absence of definitive records makes the Fertile Crescent an enduring enigma, a place where the seeds of civilization were sown quietly, leaving only fragments of the story for modern investigation. Evidence of these behavioural patterns points toward the emergence of structured society long before formal records could capture it. By analysing settlements, tools, and preserved botanical remains, archaeologists can reconstruct the lives of these early farmers, tracing the path from survival to stability. The civilization that emerged here was not written about in its own time, and its creators remain nameless, yet their choices and innovations resonate through history. These silent architects of society laid the foundation for agriculture, settlement, and the eventual rise of recorded civilizations, leaving behind an invisible legacy that shaped humanity. The first steps towards civilization were taken here, yet the moment they began remains beyond the reach of history. The Bering Land Bridge settlements. Life along the Bering Land Bridge unfolded quietly, its people navigating a corridor that no longer exists above water. This lost civilization thrived at the edge of glaciers and tundra, long before recorded history could place human society in this remote region. While much of their world has been swallowed by the rising seas of the Holocene, evidence scattered across coastal sediments and river valleys hints at organised communities that adapted to one of the most challenging environments of the prehistoric era. The bridge itself was more than a passage. It was a living landscape, offering both sustenance and peril to those who called it home. Researchers speculate that this corridor may have connected multiple small, semi-permanent settlements, forming a network of human life that is almost entirely hidden from modern eyes. The landscape offered both peril and possibility, with ice-sculpted valleys and hidden resources shaping the rhythms of daily survival. Early inhabitants relied on rivers teeming with fish, herds of migrating animals, and seasonal plant growth, learning to track and predict the natural world with remarkable accuracy. Archaeological findings suggest that the communities moved strategically across the terrain, returning to favoured locations while avoiding areas exposed to harsh winds or flooding. Each decision was a negotiation with the environment, revealing a civilization whose ingenuity lay in understanding and mastering the land, however temporarily. Studies of soil cores and sediment layers indicate that people may have cultivated small patches of edible plants or encouraged the growth of certain berries, hinting at early experimentation with proto-agriculture in an unforgiving landscape. Scattered tools and charred remains suggest patterns of repeated occupation, hinting at a civilization that left almost no permanent mark. Flint spear points, bone implements, and fragments of hearths tell a story of people whose presence was deliberate and methodical, yet largely invisible to modern observers. These traces indicate more than transient occupation. They suggest planning, knowledge sharing, and awareness of the needs of the group over time. The evidence is faint, often hidden in layers of sediment, but it reveals a subtle sophistication in human behaviour that predates any written record of settlement. Even the placement of broken tools or discarded bones may have followed patterns, potentially serving both practical and social purposes, though the full significance remains tantalizingly unknown. Hunting and foraging were coordinated, seasonal efforts, revealing strategies that required cooperation and foresight. Kill sites show evidence of communal drives, where groups worked together to herd animals into specific locations for capture. Seasonal plant gathering required careful timing, storage, and distribution among community members. These practices reflect a society structured around collaboration, where survival depended on shared knowledge, collective labour, and the ability to anticipate environmental changes. Patterns observed in artefacts suggest that these early communities were deeply aware of their surroundings, exploiting the land without exhausting its resources. Some archaeologists speculate that small-scale ritualized practices may have accompanied hunts or harvests, though the evidence is subtle, offering only glimpses of symbolic thought. Migration along the bridge was deliberate, a calculated journey informed by generations of observation and knowledge. Families and clans moved in predictable corridors, following animal migrations and seasonal water sources. Unlike wandering bands, these groups exhibited continuity in their movement, returning to familiar sites across years and decades. This cyclical migration created patterns of territorial awareness and social organisation, suggesting an early understanding of geography and community planning. Each journey left behind traces of human life, subtle signs of habitation that today require careful interpretation to uncover. Recent sonar mapping of submerged areas hints that some ancient pathways may have been reinforced or marked in ways now lost beneath the water, leaving the possibility of intentional landscape modification. Stone blades and primitive fishhooks tell of incremental innovation, as communities refine techniques over centuries. The craftsmanship of tools reflects both necessity and skill, edges sharpened for hunting, grooves carved to process plants, and hooks designed to secure elusive fish. These developments were cumulative, passed from generation to generation without writing, demonstrating learning, experimentation, and adaptation. They suggest a civilization capable of sustaining itself, improving its methods over time, and creating continuity despite the transient and fragile nature of the landscape. Some submerged artifacts recovered from nearshore sediments appear unusually shaped, raising questions about whether these early humans also engaged in proto-architectural or symbolic endeavours that remain invisible today. The placement of hearths and kill sites points to invisible social networks, structured yet ephemeral. Hearths were clustered in ways that imply shared responsibilities and social hierarchies, while kill sites indicate coordination among hunters. Even without permanent architecture, these arrangements show evidence of social organisation, communication, and planning. The society was small but structured, its cohesion maintained through collaboration and the shared understanding of survival. These unseen networks hint at a complexity that would otherwise be overlooked if one judged the civilization solely by what remains on the surface. Some researchers suggest that oral traditions and mnemonic devices may have preserved knowledge across generations, though no direct record survives to confirm this theory. As the ocean slowly rose, the land, and with it these early settlements, vanished, leaving only faint traces in sediment and memory. Sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, submerging the corridors that had once allowed human passage between continents. Entire landscapes disappeared beneath cold, dark waters, erasing dwellings, hearths, and fields from the map of human history. The disappearance was quiet and gradual, leaving no records of struggle or collapse, only the silent record embedded in soil artifacts and the occasional preserved footprint. Even modern exploration of these areas relies on piecing together indirect clues, where each discovery raises as many questions as it answers. Descendants of these people carried their knowledge to new lands, but the full extent of their vanished civilization remains submerged and unknown. The communities of the Bering Land Bridge likely influenced later populations in North and South America, yet the origins of their practices, beliefs, and social structures remain obscured by time and tide. What little has been discovered offers tantalizing glimpses into an early human world of strategic movement, cooperation, and adaptation, a civilization that thrived where survival demanded ingenuity, foresight, and resilience. The silence of the submerged corridors continues to challenge archaeologists, offering hints of a people who mastered the land long before history was written. The waves that swallowed their homeland conceal a civilization whose story remains silent and unanswered. The lost civilization beneath the Black Sea. Hidden under centuries of sediment and dark water, the Black Sea conceals traces of a civilization lost to both time and tide. Long before recorded history could place human society in this region, communities may have thrived along its expansive shores, navigating fertile floodplains and abundant coastal resources. Geological studies indicate that sea levels were much lower during the late Pleistocene, exposing vast landscapes that would later vanish beneath rising waters. These submerged plains were not mere empty stretches of land, they were likely centres of human activity, where families hunted, foraged, and built temporary dwellings, leaving only subtle imprints for future generations to uncover. When the shoreline extended far beyond its current limits, the Black Sea Basin provided a corridor of opportunity, a meeting point for humans and animals alike. Rivers that now empty into open water once carved deep valleys and deposited nutrient-rich sediments, supporting a patchwork of wetlands, forests, and grasslands. Archaeological evidence suggests that these conditions may have attracted organised communities, whose movements and settlements reflected an intricate understanding of seasonal cycles. The challenge of survival along these shifting landscapes demanded both observation and ingenuity, as early humans balanced opportunity against environmental risk in a land constantly reshaped by water. Modern sonar mapping and submersible explorations have revealed formations that hint at deliberate modification rather than chance accumulation. Terraces with regular alignments, and clusters of rounded depressions suggest that these early inhabitants may have constructed rudimentary living areas or communal spaces. While the interpretation remains speculative, the presence of worked stone fragments, charred organic material, and impressions of posts within sediments indicate that human activity was structured and intentional. These subtle traces are fragments of a civilization whose existence predates written record, their story suspended in layers of mud and time. Evidence of daily life emerges through the smallest details: tools etched from flint, bone harpoons fashioned for fishing, and fragments of pottery or woven material preserved in anaerobic sediment. These artifacts point to a population skilled in exploiting diverse resources, from riverine fish to migratory animals, and perhaps even the early cultivation of plants along fertile riverbanks. Seasonal scheduling would have been critical, with families coordinating hunting and gathering activities to ensure survival. Such patterns suggest that these early communities were not wandering bands, but socially organised groups with knowledge transmitted across generations, quietly shaping the landscape they inhabited. Spatial arrangements of hearths and refuse layers indicate the presence of social structures, though no permanent architecture survives. Clusters of burned earth hint at shared responsibilities and the division of labour, while the distribution of artefacts implies communal organisation in both everyday and ceremonial life. These glimpses of order suggest a society attuned to both its environment and to each other, capable of planning and cooperating on scales that leave only faint traces. Even without monumental constructions, the behaviour inferred from these sites reveals a human sophistication that challenges assumptions about prehistoric cultures in the region. The sudden intrusion of seawater into this once thriving landscape transformed a living environment into a submerged one, reshaping habitats and erasing the physical markers of civilization. Geological and sedimentary evidence points to rapid transgression events during the early Holocene, when melting glaciers and rising seas inundated valleys and lowlands. Entire communities may have been forced to migrate inland, or were swept away entirely, leaving no written testimony, only sedimentary signatures. The memory of these people persists as whispers in the mud, their achievements invisible to the casual observer, but etched into the strata for those who search carefully. Submerged cores have yielded plant and animal remains, fragments of tools and signs of fire, suggesting that the communities maintained their practices until the waters claimed the land. Fish bones, mammal remains, and charred seeds provide clues to subsistence strategies and seasonal patterns, while the arrangement of artifacts suggests repeated use of specific areas over time. This continuity hints at a culture with knowledge of its environment and the foresight to exploit resources sustainably. The civilization's ephemeral structures may have been simple, but the complexity of its interactions with the land demonstrates a level of intelligence and adaptation that modern observers are only beginning to recognize. Connections to later societies may exist, yet remain speculative. Genetic studies of populations surrounding the Black Sea hint at migrations and exchanges that could reflect remnants of this submerged civilization's influence. Tools and pottery styles discovered in inland sites show parallels that suggest knowledge transfer, even as the original communities faded under rising waters. These hints create a web of possibility, a lost culture whose imprint echoes in the practices, tools, and movements of subsequent groups, though the full picture remains obscured by millennia of change and submersion. Modern explorations continue to reveal tantalizing fragments of life that predate historical records. ROV surveys, sediment core analyses, and underwater excavations have uncovered features that defy simple explanation, including geometric patterns, clustered hearths, and unusual artifact groupings. Every new discovery raises more questions than it answers, hinting at a civilization whose sophistication and daily practices remain largely hidden. The challenge lies not only in the technical difficulty of excavation, but in interpreting traces preserved in a world now dominated by water, where the slightest misreading could erase the story entirely. Even as these discoveries emerge, the Black Sea retains its power to conceal. The civilization that once thrived along its ancient shores cannot be fully known, its story scattered among layers of sediment and the occasional artifact. Researchers are left to reconstruct its rhythms, social structures, and movements from fragmentary evidence, piecing together a picture that is simultaneously coherent and tantalizingly incomplete. The mystery is heightened by the sheer scale of what was lost. Entire landscapes, seasonal settlements, and human ingenuity submerged under nearly 2 kilometers of water in some areas, hiding the full scope of this vanished society. The Black Sea's dark waters guard a civilization that vanished before history could record it, leaving only whispers in the sediment. The builders of Stonehenge before history. Long before the first written record, a society capable of monumental construction carved its presence into the landscape, leaving Stonehenge as only a fragment of a greater culture. The stones themselves are remarkable, but they hint at a broader organised civilization that planned, transported, and erected massive structures without the tools, vehicles, or written systems later societies would rely upon. This culture thrived in an environment that demanded adaptability, observation, and ingenuity, balancing survival with the creation of something enduring and symbolic. While Stonehenge has been studied for centuries, it is the unseen communities, their planning, and the networks of labour that reveal a civilization whose sophistication has been largely obscured by time. Every standing stone is a shadow of human ambition, a whisper of people whose full story remains hidden from history. The rivers, chalk plains and hidden forests surrounding the site shaped how these early communities gathered materials, fed themselves and organised labour. Archaeological evidence suggests that settlements were not scattered randomly but clustered near reliable sources of food and water, with fertile valleys sustaining small-scale agriculture and forests providing timber for tools, shelters and construction scaffolding. Seasonal patterns dictated movements, with groups returning to specific locations when resources were abundant. These landscapes, while seemingly simple today, were full of challenges: unpredictable weather, shifting soils, and dense vegetation that required careful navigation. The inhabitants understood the terrain intimately, exploiting its advantages while mitigating its dangers, and their choices created rhythms of settlement that endure in the traces they left behind. Massive stones were extracted and moved with painstaking effort, demonstrating a level of coordination and engineering that challenges modern assumptions about prehistoric skill. The bluestones, originating from quarries over 150 miles away in the Preseli Hills of Wales, and the sarcents, sourced closer to Salisbury Plain, demanded transportation methods that remain partly mysterious. Some stones may have been dragged over land, floated along waterways, or manoeuvred using wooden sledges and rollers. Whatever the method, it required meticulous planning, knowledge of physics, and sustained collective effort. These logistical feats suggest not just brute strength, but a sophisticated understanding of terrain, materials, and group coordination, revealing a society capable of long-term projects that transcended individual lifespans. Remnants of timber circles, post holes, and enclosures suggest nearby settlements where seasonal labour, planning, and resource management sustained large groups of people. Excavations at sites like Durrington Walls reveal clusters of homes, communal structures, and evidence of organised feasting, suggesting that monumental construction was only one aspect of a complex cultural system. Families, artisans, and ritual specialists likely collaborated, balancing daily survival with ceremonial activity. The spatial arrangements of these settlements imply conscious planning, with living spaces, work areas, and communal zones arranged to maximise efficiency and cooperation. Each post hole and hearth is a fragment of social memory, a testament to people who coordinated life around shared purpose and monumental ambition. Alignments with the solstice and lunar cycles hint at sophisticated observation of celestial phenomena and coordinated social or religious activity across generations. Stonehenge is not merely an architectural marvel, it is a calendar, a tool for tracking the sun, moon, and seasons. Its orientation and structure suggest that the builders understood astronomical cycles with remarkable precision, translating knowledge of the heavens into tangible form. Such alignment implies social cohesion and shared rituals, as communities gathered to mark solstices and equinoxes, perform ceremonies, and observe cycles critical for agriculture and survival. The monument itself becomes a record of intellectual achievement, etched into stone in a language of geometry, time, and human aspiration. Polished axes, flint tools, and fragments of pottery reveal a people learning, experimenting, and passing knowledge forward without leaving written documentation. Each artifact is evidence of accumulated skill, refinement, and problem-solving. Axes were sharpened and shaped for cutting timber, flint knives crafted for precision work, and pottery vessels created for storage and cooking. Techniques were honed over generations, communicated through demonstration and practice rather than writing, forming a living curriculum of survival, construction, and craft. These objects, though small and fragmented, offer insight into a civilization that valued skill, continuity, and the careful transfer of knowledge, a society whose learning shaped monumental achievements without leaving formal records. Clusters of hearths and quarry sites point to invisible networks of leadership, planning, and cooperation that kept the community functioning efficiently. Labour would have been coordinated, resources allocated, and skills distributed across multiple families or clans, suggesting that early hierarchies or roles emerged organically to sustain large projects. Communal work, shared meals, and collective problem-solving reinforced bonds and ensured that monumental efforts were completed successfully. Even without written contracts or formal governance, these arrangements demonstrate that social organisation, trust, and communication were central to survival and to the creation of structures that have outlasted the society itself. Despite extensive study, the identity, traditions, and inner lives of the Stonehenge builders remain tantalizingly out of reach, preserved only in scattered artifacts and massive stones. Archaeologists can trace techniques, estimate movements, and interpret alignments, yet the beliefs, motivations, and stories that guided these people remain speculative. The absence of written language or symbolic notation leaves only material culture as evidence, forcing careful inference from stones, post holes, and organic traces. Each discovery uncovers questions as much as it provides answers, revealing a civilization whose intellectual and social depth can only be glimpsed through the structures and tools it left behind. The echoes of this culture appear faintly in later settlements, suggesting that its knowledge, rituals, and engineering practices influenced generations beyond its immediate time. Megalithic construction techniques appear elsewhere in Britain, hinting at cultural transmission and the movement of ideas across space and time. The shared understanding of celestial observation, seasonal organisation, and monumental labour points to a continuity of knowledge that shaped subsequent societies. Stonehenge, while singular in its preservation, is thus part of a network of prehistoric innovation, a fragment of a broader cultural landscape that extended far beyond what remains today. Stonehenge stands as a silent testament to a civilization whose ingenuity and vision endure, even as the people themselves have vanished into the mists of prehistory. The ancient society of Skara Brae. Buried beneath layers of windblown soil and centuries of storm, the village of Skara Brae emerges as one of the most remarkably preserved Neolithic settlements in Europe. Situated on the rugged coast of Orkney, Scotland, this ancient society existed long before written records, leaving behind only the silent evidence of their lives etched into stone. Its discovery in the mid-19th century, uncovered after a violent storm stripped away the earth covering the site, revealed a community remarkably sophisticated for a people whose history had been all but erased. Each dwelling, carved from stone slabs and clustered tightly together, tells of a society that had mastered both survival and social cohesion in a harsh and windswept environment. The layout of Skara Brae's 8 principal dwellings suggests an advanced understanding of domestic planning. Homes were connected by low, narrow passageways, allowing inhabitants to move between rooms without exposure to the harsh elements outside. Within each stone-walled room, built-in furniture such as beds, dressers, and storage boxes demonstrate that comfort and functionality were integral to daily life. The precision of these constructions, some aligned to catch the seasonal light or to provide shelter from prevailing winds, hints at knowledge that was carefully cultivated and passed down over generations. Unlike many contemporary Neolithic sites, Skara Brae's structures remain largely intact, offering an unprecedented glimpse into how prehistoric people organised their homes and communities. Artefacts recovered from the village further illuminate the complexity of this society. Stone tools of finely chipped flint, polished bone implements, and carefully shaped pottery suggest that inhabitants were skilled craftsmen capable of producing both practical and artistic objects. Items such as combs, pins, and ornaments hint at personal grooming and aesthetic concerns, revealing lives that were not only concerned with survival but also with identity and expression. Some artifacts bear traces of wear that suggest repeated handling and prolonged use, offering clues to daily routines and the rhythms of life that unfolded behind the thick stone walls. Each object contributes a fragment of a larger story, a mosaic of human ingenuity lost to time. Evidence of domestic economy emerges in the remnants of hearths and storage pits, indicating that Skara Brae's people engaged in careful planning of food and resources. Middens containing shells, bones, and discarded tools suggest a diet rich in seafood, supplemented by cultivated plants and domesticated animals. The deliberate arrangement of hearths within dwellings, often positioned near storage areas, points to both practical cooking strategies and an understanding of spatial organisation that maximised efficiency within confined spaces. Such evidence conveys that this society had developed sustainable strategies to thrive on a windswept island that offered both opportunity and challenge. The social structure of Skara Brae, while impossible to reconstruct fully, can be glimpsed through its architecture and artefacts. The uniformity of the dwellings suggests a community with limited social stratification, where cooperation may have been essential for survival. The village's design, in which passageways and shared spaces facilitate interaction, implies a society in which daily life was communal and where the management of resources and responsibilities likely required collaboration. While much about the spiritual or ceremonial aspects of life remains unknown, the presence of figurines, beads, and symbolic carvings hints at belief systems and rituals that shape behaviour and perhaps bound the community together in shared understanding. Skara Brae also offers insight into the technological capabilities of its inhabitants. The precision with which stone slabs were cut and fitted together suggests advanced techniques in construction and an intimate knowledge of local materials. Stone furniture, often hewn from a single block, indicates not only functional ingenuity, but also an eye for durability and permanence. The village was connected to the surrounding landscape in ways that speak to environmental awareness. Drainage systems channeled water efficiently, and the orientation of some dwellings may have reflected an understanding of seasonal sun and prevailing wind patterns. Each innovation, subtle yet deliberate, reveals a people finely attuned to their surroundings. Archaeological study has revealed traces of long-term occupation, with successive rebuilding indicating that Skara Brae was inhabited over centuries. This continuity speaks to a stable and resilient society capable of adapting to changing conditions, including harsh winters, shifting coastlines, and the slow encroachment of soil and sand. The repeated maintenance and reconstruction of homes imply not only practical necessity, but also an attachment to place, a rootedness in a landscape that shaped identity as much as it dictated survival. Such endurance raises questions about the beliefs, traditions, and knowledge systems that allowed this community to persist long before history recorded a single word of their existence. Despite the remarkable preservation of stone walls and artifacts, the people themselves remain invisible, their voices lost to time. The absence of written records forces modern observers to piece together lives from the traces left behind, leaving interpretation open to conjecture. Yet the mystery is not diminished by what is unknown, it is amplified. Skara Brae stands as a silent witness to the intricacies of human life long before history began, offering glimpses of domesticity, skill, and society, while concealing the deeper narratives of kinship, emotion, and belief that would have defined its inhabitants' existence. The village's discovery in the 1850s, during the aftermath of a storm that stripped away its protective covering of soil, emphasizes the fragility of memory and the accidents that preserve it. Had the storm not unearthed the settlement, Skara Brae might have remained buried and forgotten for countless more generations, its insights into Neolithic life lost entirely. Even today, continued research, careful excavation, and modern technologies such as 3D scanning and microscopic analysis allow archaeologists to uncover further details about diet, tool usage, and spatial organization. Yet every revelation deepens the sense of wonder rather than eliminating mystery. Each stone, each artifact, and each passageway contributes to a portrait of a civilization that existed before the first written accounts, one that balanced survival with ingenuity and daily routine with communal cohesion. The village offers a rare, tangible connection to a world often imagined but seldom seen, a society that managed to endure in the harsh northern climate of prehistoric Orkney and leave behind evidence that challenges assumptions about simplicity, isolation, and human capability in the distant past. Skara Brae is not merely an archaeological site, it is a preserved narrative, a story told in stone and artifact that invites careful observation, reflection, and awe. Skara Brae stands frozen, a ghostly testament to a people who lived, laboured, and vanished long before history remembered their name. The forgotten civilization of Catal Hoyuk. Rising from the fertile plains of Anatolia, Catal Hoyuk sprawls in a dense labyrinth of mud brick walls and rooftop passageways, a city without streets where lives overlapped invisibly. This lost civilization existed long before recorded history, yet its enduring traces speak of a society that embraced both ingenuity and communal life. Excavations reveal a settlement carefully organized yet perplexingly unconventional, where homes were not separated by roads but linked by pathways across their flat rooftops, compelling movement above rather than around the compact structures below. Such an arrangement suggests a social order embedded in architecture itself, one that dictated patterns of interaction and daily activity in ways we can only attempt to imagine. Within each home, interiors were meticulously constructed to balance utility and permanence. Hearths, positioned centrally, served both practical and social purposes, providing warmth, a place to cook, and perhaps a gathering point for families. Storage bins and recessed wall spaces held grains, legumes, and tools, demonstrating an awareness of both economy and preservation in a pre-industrial context. Simple yet carefully fashioned furniture, low platforms for sleeping and sitting indicates attention to domestic comfort, even within modest dimensions. Every element, from the layout of hearth to the placement of storage pits, reflects a society conscious of space, routine, and shared responsibility. Artifacts recovered at Catal Hoyuk reveal lives of surprising complexity. Clay figurines, sometimes portraying women in stylized forms, suggest ritual or spiritual significance, while the pottery vessels, marked with incised patterns or burnished finishes, were both functional and decorative. Tools of flint and obsidian indicate craftsmanship at a high level, and the presence of imported materials suggests trade with distant regions, connecting this community to a wider prehistoric network. Each object hints at intention, purpose, and the unseen hands that shaped daily existence, leaving a tangible yet enigmatic record of life long before words could define it. The city's walls themselves bear stories in pigment. Murals painted in red ochre and black depict animals, hunting scenes, and abstract motifs whose meanings remain obscured. Some appear to follow consistent patterns repeated across different homes, hinting at shared beliefs or collective rituals, while others seem more personal, confined to a single household's interior. These paintings suggest that expression and symbolism were integral to the lives of the inhabitants, yet without written explanation, the motivations behind them remain speculative. The murals raise questions about spirituality, social hierarchy, and cultural continuity, leaving the observer to consider what these silent images conveyed to those who created them. Movement through Catal Hoyuk would have been a continuous interplay between private and public, interior and exterior. Rooftop pathways link homes across the settlement, forming elevated streets where neighbours passed above one another rather than through conventional thoroughfares. The very act of moving along these roofs imposed rules, deliberate or intuitive, on who could traverse certain areas and when. Such pathways also provided vantage points over the surrounding plains, offering both practical surveillance of approaching visitors or animals and perhaps symbolic oversight of communal life. The settlement's architecture entwines daily existence with social practice, embedding mystery in its very form. Reconstruction evidence shows that homes were rebuilt and modified over generations, layers upon layers of occupation revealing a society attentive to continuity and adaptation. Walls were repaired, hearths renewed, and interior layouts adjusted over centuries, suggesting both attachment to place and a living awareness of functional necessity. This continuity demonstrates a population resilient in the face of environmental pressures, reliant on agriculture, livestock, and resource management while navigating a world without written guidance. The physical persistence of structures stands as proof that human ingenuity in prehistory was deliberate, methodical, and enduring, even when cultural memory faded into obscurity. Trade and craft specialization reveal additional layers of sophistication. Obsidian blades and imported beads demonstrate connections beyond the immediate settlement, indicating that Catal Hoyuk participated in exchange networks spanning Anatolia and perhaps farther. Specialized artisans likely devoted themselves to producing items both practical and symbolic, blending utility with ritual significance. Such division of labor suggests organization and social cohesion, even in the absence of explicit records, hinting at systems of cooperation, negotiation, and shared responsibility that cannot be fully reconstructed, but are nonetheless evident in material culture. The density of the city, with its tightly packed homes, also raises questions about governance, social hierarchy, and interpersonal dynamics. With no streets to separate dwellings, privacy would have been limited, compelling negotiation of space, resources, and routine. Yet the uniformity of structures and repetition of design elements suggests that the society maintained order through implicit norms embedded in architectural form, rather than through written laws or centralized authority. Every roof, doorway, and interior arrangement was both functional and social, shaping interactions in ways modern observers can trace but never fully understand. Environmental context was equally integral to survival. Catal Hoyuk sat amidst fertile plains suitable for early farming, with access to water, wild game, and nearby obsidian sources. Agriculture and animal husbandry were essential, yet evidence also points to adaptation to seasonal change, resource scarcity, and climatic variability. Such planning indicates a sophisticated understanding of the surrounding landscape, a tacit knowledge accumulated over generations, transmitted through practice and observation rather than inscription. This intimate connection between settlement and environment contributed to the community's persistence, yet it also reinforces the fragility of knowledge unrecorded in writing. The ultimate fate of Catal Hoyuk remains uncertain. Archaeologists continue to debate whether its decline was gradual or sudden, whether it merged into other emerging settlements, or whether environmental or social factors precipitated abandonment. Despite the unanswered questions, the settlement endures in material remains that continue to yield insight. Each excavation uncovers fragments of walls, pots, figurines, and murals, leaving traces of a society whose complexity rivals later urban civilizations, yet whose story is told only through shadowed evidence. These remnants invite reflection on the fragility of human achievement and the enduring enigma of cultures lost to time. Catal Hoyuk is more than an archaeological site. It is a frozen testament to early urban life, a community that balanced practicality with expression, domesticity with ritual, and individuality with communal coherence. Its dense streets, rooftop walkways, symbolic artifacts, and reconstructed homes offer a window into a civilization that existed before recorded history, yet leaves us with enduring questions about how people lived, thought, and related to one another. Every surface, object, and pathway carries the silent imprint of lives that were, in their time, vibrant and intricate, and yet invisible to all but the careful observer. Even as modern science continues to reveal architectural alignments, dietary habits, and craft techniques, the human stories behind them remain veiled, leaving a sense of awe and mystery that transcends conventional historical narrative. The city speaks in mud, paint, and stone, whispering lessons about innovation, cooperation, and belief, while its true meanings linger just out of reach, beyond the limits of reconstruction and interpretation. Catal Hoyuk lingers as a labyrinth of lives unseen, a city of muted voices and enduring enigmas whose secrets remain suspended between earth and sky. The Indus Valley before its cities. Encased in layers of earth, fragments of pottery and flint reveal the daily lives of people who lived long before the Indus Valley cities arose. This lost civilization existed before recorded history, yet each fragment reveals the echoes of human ingenuity, of careful labour and thought preserved through time. Hearths, simple storage pits, and stone tools hint at routines carried out in scattered settlements, where survival demanded both skill and cooperation. Though no walls or streets remain intact from these earliest communities, the traces they left behind speak of lives lived with foresight, invention, and a quiet resilience that archaeology only begins to reconstruct. Among the clay fragments, small figurines and incised tokens suggest a fascination with identity, symbolism, and perhaps ritual. Some appear to represent animals, others abstract forms whose purpose remains obscure. These objects, often discovered in association with hearths or storage pits, hint at patterns of thought and belief that are impossible to fully decipher. The makers left no written explanation, yet their hands shaped narratives through craft, embedding meaning into material culture that survives across millennia. Every vessel, every tool, every figurine is a whisper from a civilization that existed before writing or recorded memory. Even the simplest tools reveal sophistication. Chipped flint blades, polished bone implements, and rudimentary digging tools suggest careful planning, repetition, and refinement. The effort required to shape and maintain these items reflects not only physical labour, but also cognitive skill and knowledge transmission. The inhabitants of these early Indus settlements were observing, experimenting, and perfecting methods for daily life in ways that would later support urban complexity. Each artifact hints at routines, priorities, and intelligence that leave no direct account of social structures, but reveal the underlying ingenuity of a people quietly forging civilization from the land. Hearths, modest yet essential, show evidence of careful placement within homes and communal areas. balancing warmth, cooking needs, and social interaction. Storage pits, often lined with clay, suggest an understanding of preservation and resource management, a tacit recognition of scarcity and abundance. These practices indicate not merely survival, but the emergence of planning, foresight, and cooperation. Even without formal records, the organisation of these early settlements reflects deliberate action, demonstrating a community striving towards stability and continuity. Agriculture played a central role in this process. Early Indus Valley inhabitants cultivated wheat, barley, and other crops, while domesticating animals for meat, milk, and labour. Archaeological evidence indicates careful management of water through simple channels, embankments, and seasonal observation, allowing communities to navigate the unpredictable rhythms of flooding and drought. These adaptations reveal a sophisticated awareness of the environment and an ability to manipulate it in measured ways. The civilization was already engaging with long-term planning and the balancing of natural forces, hinting at the knowledge that would eventually enable large-scale urban centres. Proto-urban tendencies emerge even in these scattered settlements. Remains of aligned dwellings, shared work areas, and early granaries suggest an understanding of organisation beyond individual households. The need for cooperation, whether in farming, resource storage, or tool production, likely drove early social structures. Evidence of craft specialisation and communal effort hints at hierarchies and coordination, though the specifics remain unknown. The settlements display the earliest stirrings of urban thought, planning, social negotiation, and collective innovation before streets, walls, or formal governance defined cities. Symbols and small artifacts point to cognitive complexity and cultural expression. Clay seals engraved with motifs, figurines carved from stone or bone, and repetitive markings on pottery imply communication, ritual, or identity. Some motifs are abstract, others depict animals in stylized forms. The purpose of these symbols remains mysterious, yet they reveal the beginnings of abstract thought and societal interaction. Even in the absence of written language, these markings speak of identity, intention, and a desire to embed meaning into the physical world, leaving questions about belief systems, social cohesion, and symbolic communication unanswered. The physical remnants also suggest a delicate balance between permanence and impermanence. Many of these early settlements were modest, ephemeral, and susceptible to seasonal floods or soil shifts. Yet their careful construction, aligned hearths, reinforced storage pits, and crafted tools speaks to a conscious effort to impose order on a changing landscape. Continuity of occupation across generations shows resilience and adaptation, an experimental phase of civilization gradually coalescing into the more permanent urban forms of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These foundational communities were invisible to history for millennia, yet their impact on the trajectory of human society is undeniable. Even as the Indus Valley evolved into its famous cities, the earliest settlements retain an air of enigma. They show humans observing their environment, innovating with limited resources, and experimenting with organisation long before formal urbanism or written communication arose. Archaeological investigation has revealed canals, hearths, and traces of dwellings. Yet, what daily life was like, how people negotiated conflict, ritual, or community, remains conjecture. The civilization existed in silence, leaving a trail of material evidence that must be interpreted without context, each fragment a puzzle piece of lives that can never fully be known. These early foundations emphasize both ingenuity and mystery. By tracing the scattered evidence of human endeavour along the rivers and plains of the Indus, researchers glimpse a society on the cusp of transformation. They see communities capable of organisation, skilled in craft and agriculture, and aware of their environment's challenges. Yet they also see the limits of reconstruction. The people themselves, their intentions, their daily dramas remain invisible. Every artifact recovered raises questions as much as it answers them, leaving modern observers to assemble a civilization from the faintest traces, suspended between imagination and evidence. Even as modern techniques, soil analysis, remote sensing, and excavation uncover more of these early settlements, the lives and thoughts of the people who built them remain largely intangible. The Indus Valley before its cities represents both the ingenuity of early humans and the enduring elusiveness of prehistoric life. The civilization that laid the groundwork for monumental urban centres did so in silence, leaving only fragments, impressions, and a whisper of its presence. Every shard, hearth, and figurine invites speculation, yet confirms that human creativity and adaptation were flourishing long before history began. The earliest dwellers of the Indus leave only fragments behind, whispering of a civilization that existed long before history could capture its presence. The submerged settlements of the North Sea coastlines. Generations once lived along coastlines that no longer exist, their routines, work, and presence nearly erased by the slow encroachment of the sea. Long before history recorded kingdoms and cities, people built communities along rivers and tidal plains, their daily lives intertwined with the rhythms of water and land. Each household, each tool, each hearth spoke of effort and ingenuity, yet the ocean now conceals almost all evidence of their existence. What remains are fragments and impressions that archaeology painstakingly reconstructs, whispers of a civilization that existed before recorded history, hinting at the lives of those who vanished beneath waves they could not resist. Layers of mud and peat preserve the faint outlines of dwellings, hinting at lives organized around hearths, tools, and the labor of generations. Archaeologists have uncovered timbers aligned in post holes, the remnants of floors and depressions that mark storage pits. These physical traces suggest a deliberate, measured use of space, a concern for domestic order and shared activity that is remarkable for communities so long forgotten. Though fragile and incomplete, each discovery contributes to a vision of daily life, revealing how people navigated the challenges of a landscape perpetually threatened by encroaching waters. Timber posts and worn stones trace the shapes of homes, offering glimpses into communities that survived for centuries yet vanished without a trace. Excavations reveal dwellings arranged in loose clusters, perhaps indicating family units or social grouping. The repetition of architectural patterns suggests knowledge transfer and shared building practices, while the orientation of posts and hearths implies awareness of prevailing winds, drainage, and seasonal change. These faint blueprints of early settlements speak to foresight, planning, and adaptation, hallmarks of a people whose ingenuity vanished almost as quickly as the land they occupied. Flint tools, pottery shards, and fragments of fishing equipment suggest ingenuity and adaptation, while the people who used them remain invisible beneath centuries of sediment. Sharp-edged implements, crafted with care, reveal attention to efficiency and durability, used for cutting, scraping, and shaping food and materials. Pottery fragments, sometimes decorated with simple motifs, hint at domestic life and social identity, while bone tools and net weights suggest a reliance on fishing and waterborne resources. Each artifact is a silent message, a tangible link to a society whose everyday activities are otherwise unknowable, preserved by chance and decay, resistant materials rather than intention. Storage pits and aligned posts reveal cooperation and planning, a quiet order emerging in settlements long hidden from view. The arrangement of communal spaces suggests coordination between households, perhaps for food storage, tool production, or shared labour. Some pits contain remnants of grain or seeds, while others hold the refuse of daily life, offering insight into diet and resource management. The evidence implies that these coastal communities were not isolated or haphazard, but socially organised, with implicit rules governing work, storage, and survival, yet the details of their social hierarchy remain lost to history. Small figurines, engraved tokens, and patterned pottery evoke symbolic thought and social identity, their meaning suspended in mystery. Miniature carvings of animals, abstract shapes, or geometric designs appear in contexts that hint at ritual, communication, or simple decoration. Whether intended for worship, storytelling, or status is impossible to determine, yet the presence of symbolic objects indicates cognitive complexity and shared culture. These artifacts suggest that even in the absence of writing, these communities engaged in thought beyond survival, embedding meaning into objects and leaving tantalizing traces of behavior that cannot be fully interpreted. Sediment layers record rising waters and shifting landscapes, capturing the presence and sudden absence of entire communities. Analysis of soil strata reveals how post-Ice Age sea level rise gradually submerged the coastal plains, transforming once fertile land into estuaries and shallow seas. Some settlements show evidence of abandonment prior to flooding, while others appear to have been overtaken more abruptly, leaving structural remnants frozen in place. The layers preserve both continuity and catastrophe, showing the delicate balance between human effort and environmental change, and the impermanence of civilizations even when ingenuity is abundant. Archaeological reconstructions, assembled from fragments, reveal the ingenuity, culture, and adaptation of people whose lives survive only in whispers beneath the waves. Combining underwater mapping, coring, and excavation, researchers can approximate settlement layouts, infer subsistence strategies, and propose social patterns. The settlements demonstrate a mastery of coastal resources, with evidence of fishing, foraging, and early cultivation alongside careful management of timber and stone. Yet the gaps are profound. Much remains speculation, and each reconstruction is a careful dialogue between what is tangible and what can only be imagined. Even as modern technology allows deeper understanding, the submerged settlements resist complete interpretation. Sonar imaging uncovers outlines of drowned forests and peat flats where homes once stood, while diving expeditions reveal fragments of domestic life preserved in anaerobic mud. Every discovery raises new questions. How were decisions made? What rituals structured their world? And how did these communities interact with neighbouring inland or coastal groups? The evidence evokes both human achievement and fragility, a civilization that thrived, adapted, and ultimately disappeared under forces beyond its control. These North Sea communities demonstrate the tension between ingenuity and impermanence, adaptation and vulnerability. They remind us that civilizations do not exist in isolation from natural forces. Even careful planning and skilled labour could not resist the slow, inexorable rise of the sea. The traces left behind, timber, tools, pottery, and soil impressions, are all that remain to speak for a people who vanished almost entirely, their stories suspended between sediment and water, imagination and evidence. The drowned settlements of the North Sea hold their secrets beneath centuries of water, leaving only fragments to whisper the existence of a civilization erased from memory. The early European megalithic network. Somewhere in prehistoric Europe, communities undertook feats of construction that would leave traces long after their names were lost to history. Long before writing and recorded kingdoms, people coordinated labour across immense distances, creating arrangements that defy easy explanation and reveal an astonishing level of planning. These efforts were not isolated. They appear in recurring patterns across hills, plains, and river valleys, suggesting societies connected by knowledge, shared practices, or ritual priorities. The traces left behind speak of ambition, skill, and communal organisation, far older than any written record could capture. Across plains, hills, and river valleys, hints of human organisation emerge, suggesting coordinated labour and shared knowledge that predates recorded memory. Sites separated by hundreds of kilometres display remarkable consistency in layout, orientation, and form, implying the transmission of ideas or techniques across long distances. While no written documentation exists, the repetition of designs, circular enclosures, aligned rows, and chambered tombs reveals a continuity of purpose that hints at networks of communities collaborating over generations. Each site is a fragment of a story whose full narrative remains tantalizingly out of reach. Early societies shaped their environment with careful planning, leaving marks of domestic, ceremonial, and communal activity that speak of long-lost ambitions. Foundations for monumental structures often show evidence of levelled surfaces, cleared approaches, and post holes, suggesting deliberate preparation and architectural foresight. Moving massive stones without wheeled vehicles would have required ropes, sledges, coordinated manpower, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The planning implied by these arrangements demonstrates not only physical effort but also social cohesion, coordination, and knowledge of materials that challenges assumptions about the capabilities of prehistoric communities. Coordinating such labour implies organised communities capable of long-term projects and division of roles. Some sites contain evidence of dwellings, storage pits, or workspaces nearby, suggesting that construction and daily life were intertwined. These settlements indicate a rhythm of seasonal labour, communal feasts, and perhaps hierarchical oversight, yet the precise social structures remain speculative. The presence of repeated structural motifs across different regions hints at shared cultural norms, but the identities, beliefs, and decision-making methods of these people are largely lost to history, leaving only their achievements as enigmatic testimony. Evidence of ritual artistry and symbolic objects points to beliefs and practices that were integral to daily and ceremonial life. Human remains placed within chambers, pottery fragments and occasional carvings suggest funerary practices or ancestral veneration. Some sites display intricate patterns carved or engraved on stones, hinting at symbolic meanings, while small objects imply offerings or ceremonial use. These clues reveal a depth of cultural expression, but their significance remains veiled, and the intentions behind each act of placement are unknown, heightening the sense of mystery surrounding these civilizations. Alignments, patterns, and repeated forms indicate awareness of celestial movements and a sophisticated understanding of the natural world. Certain stone rows and circles mark the positions of the sun during solstices or equinoxes, while others may track lunar cycles or notable stars. These alignments suggest that early communities observed the sky over long periods, integrating celestial knowledge into the placement of monuments and possibly their agricultural or ritual calendars. The precision of these placements continues to intrigue researchers, as no written guidance survives to explain how these calculations were made or why they were considered significant. Communities separated by great distances appear to have shared techniques, ideas, and practices, hinting at early networks that spanned the continent. Similar construction methods and recurring motifs across Britain, Brittany, Iberia, and Scandinavia imply that knowledge travelled, whether through migration, trade, or ritual gatherings. While the mechanisms remain speculative, these connections reveal societies that were not isolated. They were participants in a broader cultural exchange whose scope and purpose are largely obscured by time. Each monument thus becomes both a local achievement and a thread in a continental network that survives only as stone and pattern. Strategic placement within the landscape further demonstrates careful consideration by these communities. Stones are often aligned with natural landmarks, hills, rivers, and valleys, and positioned to create sightlines, pathways, or ceremonial approaches. This integration with geography suggests an intentional dialogue between human activity and the environment, blending practicality with symbolic meaning. Even the selection of sites now partially destroyed by erosion or human activity hints at a consciousness of place, where geography itself was part of the cultural and spiritual framework of the builders. Time, weather, and human interference have obscured much of their work, leaving only fragments and impressions to reveal the breadth of their endeavours. Many stones have toppled, eroded, or been repurposed, and modern land use has further scattered the remnants. Yet enough survives to demonstrate patterns of alignment, repetition, and monumental intent, allowing glimpses into an extraordinary human story. Each surviving site becomes a puzzle piece, offering tantalizing hints at the scale, knowledge, and ambition of civilizations that history has almost entirely forgotten. Reconstructions from surviving stones, post holes, and remnants suggest both ingenuity and coordination, yet the full scale, purpose, and meaning of these early European civilizations remain a profound mystery. Scholars have proposed models for how stones were moved, labour organised, and alignments calculated, but these remain hypotheses. What is clear is that a remarkable degree of foresight, communal effort, and shared understanding was required. Skills that hint at societies far more complex than their absence from written history might suggest. The more we uncover, the deeper the questions grow, as every revelation exposes further layers of enigma. The vanished communities that raise these monumental networks leave behind patterns that whisper of knowledge, belief, and ambition far older than any written record. They created systems of order, ritual, and connection that stretched across a continent, yet their voices remain silent and their intentions are only partially revealed. The stones, alignments, and fragments survive as evidence of civilizations that mastered cooperation, observation, and ingenuity, but whose story has been lost to time. Even as the stones endure, their silent geometries continue to guard the secrets of civilizations that vanished long before history could record their names. The ancient culture beneath the Gobi Desert. Evidence of hearths, tools, and carefully placed objects hints at a civilization that thrived long before recorded history, enduring in a region that would one day become the harsh expanse of the Gobi Desert. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of pottery, stone implements, and remnants of dwellings that speak to a sophisticated understanding of daily survival, yet the society that created them remains largely enigmatic. Unlike later cities with written accounts, This culture left no records, and the clues are sparse. Hearths that still bear traces of charred food, grinding stones worn smooth from repeated use, and carefully arranged fragments that suggest both practical and ceremonial intent. Even in their incompleteness, these traces reveal a people who mastered life in an environment that now seems unforgiving. Carefully constructed storage pits and remnants of domesticated animals provide a glimpse into how these communities sustained themselves. Seeds, bones, and pottery fragments indicate methods of preservation and resource management, hinting at planning and foresight across seasons of scarcity. These early inhabitants likely relied on a combination of hunting, herding, and gathering, adjusting their strategies to shifting conditions. The remains suggest a balance between mobility and permanence, as settlements were occupied long enough to leave meaningful traces, yet flexible enough to relocate when environmental pressures demanded. Each pit and midden whispers of routines, sacrifices, and skills that modern investigators can only partially reconstruct. Stone implements, grinding tools, and fragments of clothing illustrate the craftsmanship that underpinned daily life. Each tool reflects knowledge of materials, techniques, and purposes that required skill and learning. The stones were shaped to serve precise functions, whether cutting, scraping, or grinding, while the worn surfaces of grinding tools speak to repeated cycles of preparation and nourishment. The remnants of clothing, whether inferred from textile fragments or impressions in hardened clay, hint at adaptation to both temperature extremes and seasonal variation. These artifacts collectively reveal a culture capable of innovation, yet the deeper meanings behind some objects, whether symbolic, ritualistic, or practical, remain hidden beneath millennia of sand. Burial practices uncovered at scattered sites suggest a rich spiritual or ritualistic dimension to life. Some graves contain carefully arranged items, while others appear deliberately positioned in patterns that remain difficult to interpret. The inclusion of tools, ornaments, and remnants of food hints at beliefs in an afterlife or continued existence beyond death. Though researchers can only speculate, the attention given to these burials suggests that these people regarded ritual and memory as integral to their culture. Each grave is a fragment of an unspoken story, offering glimpses into values, reverence, and the unknown fears or hopes of a vanished civilization. Traces of non-local materials such as obsidian, jade, and shells indicate networks of early exchange and communication across vast distances. These objects, sometimes found hundreds of kilometers from their natural sources, imply connections between distant groups who shared resources, ideas, or ceremonial objects. Whether through trade, seasonal migration, or social gatherings, these networks demonstrate that even in a region that would later be considered inhospitable, people sought contact and collaboration. The existence of such networks challenges assumptions about isolation in prehistoric deserts and suggests a sophistication in social and economic organisation that modern understanding is only beginning to appreciate. Changes in water availability and shifts in climate left profound marks on these communities. Archaeologists have identified dried riverbeds, the remains of ephemeral lakes, and sediment patterns that reveal periods of relative abundance and harsh drought. Settlements were often abandoned or relocated as access to water and food fluctuated, suggesting a keen awareness of environmental cycles and an ability to respond to long-term climatic pressures. These movements created a patchwork of habitation sites across the landscape, each telling a partial story of endurance, adaptation, and eventual disappearance. The relentless challenge of survival shaped not only practical decisions but possibly also social structures and communal priorities. Every artifact, alignment, and hearth uncovered provokes more questions than answers. How did these people coordinate seasonal movements? What cultural knowledge guided their craft, trade, and ritual? Why did certain settlements endure while others were abandoned? The silence of time leaves these questions unanswered, yet the fragments themselves suggest a civilization both resilient and enigmatic. Each discovery adds layers to the mystery, revealing a society that mastered survival and ingenuity, while leaving only tantalizing traces behind. The deeper archaeologists look, the more the desert seems to guard its secrets. Patterns of daily life, labour, and communal organisation can be inferred from site layouts and tool distributions. Evidence points to designated areas for food preparation, communal storage, and craft work, suggesting division of labour and shared responsibilities. The scale and sophistication of these arrangements imply coordinated efforts and long-term planning, yet the precise nature of leadership, governance, or social hierarchy remains unknown. Even the smallest artifact, an intricately shaped tool or ornament, can hint at cultural complexity, demonstrating that survival in the Gobi required more than simple subsistence. It demanded knowledge, ingenuity, and cooperation across generations. Despite centuries of wind, erosion, and desertification, fragments of this society endure, allowing glimpses of human resilience in extreme conditions. Pottery shards, tools, and burial remnants reveal ingenuity and adaptation, yet much has been lost to the elements. Every excavation uncovers more puzzles than solutions, as the desert both preserves and conceals. Researchers can reconstruct patterns, infer behaviours, and propose theories, but the full scope of the culture, the stories, beliefs, and decisions of its people, remains tantalisingly out of reach. The region's harshness has claimed much, but it has also safeguarded traces that might otherwise have vanished entirely. Though no written records survive, the civilization beneath the sands demonstrates remarkable intelligence, adaptation, and cultural sophistication. They endured in an environment few could tolerate, managing resources, constructing tools, and establishing networks that connected them beyond immediate surroundings. Each artifact reflects survival strategies intertwined with tradition, yet every discovery reminds us of what has been lost: knowledge, language, and the lived experience of a people who thrived long before history began to record human achievement. Below the unyielding desert, the faint traces of this vanished civilization linger, whispering secrets that may never be fully understood. The first coastal civilizations of Southeast Asia. Entire villages along what is now the coasts of Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia may have vanished without a trace, swallowed by tides that once lapped gently over the Sunda Shelf, leaving only fragments for modern researchers to interpret. Beneath shallow waters and sediment, scattered remnants hint at societies that thrived long before written records, surviving along shorelines that would later disappear beneath rising seas. Pottery shards, shell tools, and wooden fragments suggest communities that had adapted to shifting tides with ingenuity and foresight. Yet the full extent of their settlements and the complexity of their daily lives remain hidden, veiled beneath centuries of water and sand. Each discovery seems to whisper of human skill and resilience, while simultaneously reminding us of how fleeting their world became. Fishermen and dredgers were the first to stumble upon signs of these early communities, dragging nets that revealed fragments of domestic life. Broken bowls, fish bones, and impressions of wooden structures hardened in silt. These chance discoveries prompted careful underwater surveys, uncovering faint outlines of dwellings and platforms that suggest settlements oriented to both tides and resources. Unlike the enduring stone monuments of other prehistoric societies, the traces here are fragile, ephemeral, yet they speak volumes about human adaptability. Even the smallest artifact, a net weight or a shell tool, carries evidence of strategy, knowledge, and an intimate understanding of a watery environment that demanded constant attention and skill. The ingenuity of these coastal peoples extended far beyond simple subsistence. Wooden posts, arranged in patterns now partially obscured by silt, suggest fish traps and platforms that allowed controlled harvesting from tidal waters. Hearths and storage pits indicate foresight and communal planning, while rudimentary boats, inferred from traces and associated artifacts, hint at mobility, trade, and a capacity to exploit distant resources. The challenge of life along the changing shorelines required not only technical skill but social coordination, and these communities clearly possessed both. Their survival strategies, crafted in response to shifting tides and seasonal cycles, reflect a level of sophistication that leaves modern investigators both impressed and perplexed. Evidence of long-distance exchange has emerged in the form of obsidian, jade, and shells originating far from the Sunda Shelf. These materials, found at multiple submerged sites, suggest networks connecting disparate communities across islands and coasts, revealing a web of interaction and commerce previously thought impossible for such early societies. Whether these connections were for trade, ritual purposes, or cultural exchange, the traces point to an intricate social landscape. The presence of these foreign materials raises new questions. How far did people travel, and what knowledge or traditions accompanied the goods they carried? Each discovery adds a layer of mystery, hinting at a complex, interconnected maritime world now mostly lost beneath rising seas. The submerged settlements themselves reveal subtle organisation and planning. Underwater mounds, remnants of wooden dwellings, and aligned post holes suggest neighbourhoods or communal spaces, perhaps even early marketplaces. The arrangement of these structures demonstrates awareness of tides, resource distribution, and environmental hazards. Yet without walls or continuous structures preserved, archaeologists must infer patterns and meaning from fragments alone. The absence of written records means that interpretation is always incomplete, and every conclusion is provisional, reminding us of how much human ingenuity can vanish when confronted with nature's transformations. Daily life emerges faintly from the artifacts recovered. Fish bones and shell middens indicate diet and methods of food preparation, while pottery fragments reveal both practical and possibly symbolic purposes. The careful placement of storage pits and the reuse of tools suggest planning across seasons and generations, a rhythm of labour attuned to environmental change. Every fragment tells of decisions made to survive, to harvest effectively, and to preserve resources, yet the surrounding water and sediment obscure context, leaving the broader story tantalisingly incomplete. The material evidence demonstrates resilience, but it also hints at vulnerability, an early society thriving precariously on the edge of a changing coastline. The gradual rise of sea levels ultimately erased these settlements, leaving ghostly traces for modern science to uncover. Areas once teeming with activity became submerged, while currents and tides scattered the remnants. Wooden structures decayed, pottery broke and sank, and midden heaps were slowly buried beneath sediment layers. These submerged landscapes act as both archive and barrier. They preserve fragments but resist full comprehension. Researchers working in these environments often uncover only hints of dwellings or paths, with each artifact suggesting a larger world now lost. The past is present in fragments, but the whole remains tantalizingly out of reach, hidden beneath layers of water and time. The mystery deepens when considering what daily life may have entailed beyond these traces. How were these coastal communities organized socially? Did they observe rituals tied to the tides or the sea? How did knowledge of currents, weather, and seasonal patterns inform their survival strategies? No written records survive to answer these questions, and the fragments provide only partial clues. Yet even these glimpses reveal sophisticated adaptation, knowledge of tides, construction of dwellings on stilts, and resource management that allowed life in a fragile and shifting environment. Every artifact carries both practical and symbolic meaning, a whisper of culture now partially drowned by the sea. Modern investigations continue to piece together this vanished maritime world, using sonar mapping, dredging, and underwater excavation. Each discovery, whether a shard of pottery, a net weight, or a post hole, reveals ingenuity, survival, and the ephemeral nature of human endeavour in a coastal environment. Still, for every artifact recovered, much remains hidden. The submerged landscapes resist complete interpretation, reminding archaeologists that their work is as much about imagination and inference as it is about evidence. These fragments point toward human resilience, yet they also confront us with the stark reality of what is lost to time and tide. Though centuries have passed and sea levels have reshaped the coastline, the early maritime societies of Southeast Asia offer invaluable insight into human adaptation, innovation, and the impermanence of civilization. Their traces tell of communities that survived, thrived, and traded across coasts, yet vanished beneath rising waters without leaving a written record. They challenge assumptions about early human organization, seafaring ability, and environmental awareness, leaving modern investigators to marvel at ingenuity while acknowledging the limits of reconstruction. The fragments are both a testament to life and a reminder of the fragility of all human endeavours when confronted by the inexorable forces of nature. Under the ever-shifting tides of the Sunda Shelf, the vanished coastal communities whisper secrets of lives adapted and lost, leaving only fragments to haunt the present. The prehistoric societies of the Nile before dynasties. Along the fertile curves of the Nile, early communities carved out a life in coordination with the river, leaving traces of organised villages that hint at societies long vanished before recorded history. Archaeological evidence suggests that these people were not merely surviving, they were orchestrating complex patterns of habitation, agriculture, and social interaction that allowed them to thrive in an environment both generous and unpredictable. Each artifact recovered, from carefully shaped stone tools to the remains of reed dwellings, speaks to a rhythm of life intertwined with the seasonal pulse of the river. The mystery lies not only in what they achieved, but in the fleeting nature of their existence, as centuries of silt and shifting channels have erased most direct evidence of their presence. Pottery shards, stone implements, and the faint outlines of homes provide glimpses into daily life along the river. Unlike the monumental architecture that would characterize later dynastic Egypt, these early villages relied on materials that could be repurposed, repaired, or replaced as the river reshaped the landscape. Hearths and storage pits suggest households planning beyond immediate survival, while shared spaces imply cooperation and possibly communal decision-making. These small clues reveal a people who understood their environment intimately, yet whose ingenuity remains partially obscured by the passage of time. Subtle channels and embankments show that these societies were already experimenting with directing water to support cultivation, laying the foundations for agricultural stability that would sustain generations. Raised beds, simple dikes, and water diversion techniques reflect a deep understanding of the Nile's behaviour, enabling communities to mitigate the risks of flooding or drought. Unlike later monumental irrigation systems, these early interventions were modest but ingenious, demonstrating that technological innovation emerged gradually and organically, guided by necessity and observation rather than imperial decree. The layout of homes and communal areas hints at social organisation emerging long before formal leadership or codified laws. Certain clusters of dwellings suggest family or extended household groupings, while communal storage areas imply collective responsibility and planning. Evidence of differentiated construction, larger or more fortified dwellings, may indicate hierarchies or social status, though the exact nature of leadership remains unknowable. Even in these early communities, the balance between cooperation and individual need shaped the rhythms of life along the river, creating social networks that extended beyond the confines of a single village. Objects crafted from materials sourced far from the Nile Valley indicate early networks of exchange. Exotic minerals, shells from distant coasts, and pigments that required long-distance transport suggest trade or ceremonial acquisition, hinting at cultural connections stretching across the region. The presence of these items raises questions about how people travelled, communicated, and shared knowledge without written records, and whether these exchanges included ideas, rituals, or social practices alongside material goods. The river itself may have served as both highway and boundary, channeling movement while presenting challenges that demanded ingenuity and navigation skills. Burial practices, decorated pottery, and symbolic carvings provide tantalizing glimpses into spiritual and ritual life. Early cemeteries reveal carefully positioned bodies, sometimes accompanied by tools, ornaments, or food offerings, implying beliefs about death, continuity, or the supernatural. Patterns in decoration and deposition hint at conventions that govern social or ceremonial behaviour, yet the absence of decipherable written records leaves these interpretations speculative. These traces offer evidence that cognition and culture extended beyond mere subsistence, suggesting that early Nile communities nurtured traditions, symbolism, and possibly collective memory that influenced subsequent civilizations. Environmental challenges were a constant presence, shaping settlement and lifestyle. Seasonal floods could enrich the soil or sweep away entire structures, while changes in the river's course required adaptability and foresight. Dwellings were often constructed on slightly raised ground, with storage pits and granaries designed to survive inundation. Evidence of repair and reconstruction indicates repeated adaptation, and the careful placement of homes and communal spaces demonstrates awareness of both risk and opportunity. The river, a source of sustenance and danger, was the ultimate arbiter of survival, shaping the architecture, agriculture, and social organization of these early communities. Many villages remain partially hidden under layers of alluvial soil, their stories retrievable only in isolated discoveries. Artifacts such as tools, pottery fragments, and remnants of dwellings offer tantalizing hints of life, yet they resist full reconstruction. Without written records, modern researchers must interpret these scattered clues with caution, blending empirical evidence with reasoned inference. The surviving material suggests patterns of labour, trade, and ritual, But the full scope of these communities, their beliefs, social dynamics and interactions, remains elusive. Each new find sparks excitement, but it also deepens the mystery, leaving us aware of the immense gaps in understanding that separate the present from this prehistoric world. Despite the challenges, it is clear that these early Nile societies were sophisticated in both thought and practice. They cultivated land, coordinated labour, exchanged goods, and observed rituals that required planning and shared understanding. Their innovations, while modest compared with later monumental achievements, reflect a deep intelligence and a capacity for foresight. The patterns of settlement, agriculture, and social cooperation established by these communities foreshadowed the administrative and cultural structures that would later support Egypt's dynasties, revealing a civilization in the making long before pharaohs inscribed their names in stone. The organisational patterns, agricultural methods, and social coordination of these communities illuminate the foundations of Egypt's later monumental culture, yet much remains unknowable. Without inscriptions or contemporary accounts, the earliest Nile societies exist only in the material traces left behind and the subtle rhythms they imposed on the landscape. Their villages, tools, and ritual sites tell a story of adaptation, creativity, and resilience, but the narrative is incomplete. We see their lives in glimpses, a puzzle missing many pieces, and the questions that remain are as compelling as the evidence itself. The earliest Nile communities continue to murmur across time, their coordinated lives and silent rituals preserved only in the faint impressions they left upon a river that has flowed for millennia.